Hey, did you know that over 90% of our viewers watch our videos but haven't subscribed yet? If you enjoy these true trucker horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It's free and really motivates us to keep the stories rolling. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's stories.
Story number 1. The fog came down just after midnight, as if someone had poured a slow, milky river across the highway and left it there to thicken. Daniel Hale watched it fold over the world in layers, obscuring the stars and swallowing the lonely ribbon of Route 46, until the beam of his headlights seemed to be pushing into a wall made of damp breath. The old Freightliner hummed steadily beneath him, a patient iron animal that had seen every kind of weather and every kind of road. Inside the cab, it was a private universe of muted light and low sound. The dashboard glowed in soft greens and oranges. The heater blew a constant, comforting draft around his legs. The faint rattle from an empty coffee thermos in the cup holder marked each subtle bump in the pavement. Beyond the windshield, the world was reduced to two white lines, a gray lane, and the suggestion of trees pressed close on either side. Daniel preferred nights like this, at least when the fog wasn't this dense. The emptiness made him feel like the last person awake in the world, gliding through some forgotten corridor of it. But the fog tonight had weight, a thickness that turned every beam of light into something physical. It was more like moving underwater than driving through air. The wipers whispered back and forth rhythmically, smearing tiny beads of moisture into fleeting streaks. He checked the clock on the dash. 12:17 a.m. He had been on this road for nearly 2 hours since the last truck stop, the one with the flickering neon cowboy boot and the coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. According to his atlas, the next town was still 30 miles away. 30 miles of two-lane blacktop, dense forest, and tonight, a fog so complete that the high beams only made it worse. He tried the radio again, more out of habit than hope. The scan function tripped over station after station of static and faint snatches of distant voices. A sliver of an old rock song surfaced, then vanished. A preacher's voice emerged for a moment, sonorous and slow, before dissolving back into white noise. None of it held. The scanner finally gave up and returned to a low hiss. The CB was just as quiet. Occasionally, a burst of sound crackled through, half a call sign, a laugh, a fragment of complaint about dispatch, but the usual rolling conversation of night drivers wasn't there. Out here, on this forgotten stretch, it was as if the world had narrowed to his headlights and the purr of his engine. On either side of the highway, dark shapes hinted at trees, but the fog was too thick to allow their branches a clear outline. Sometimes, when he squinted, he thought he saw fence posts. A moment later, they were gone. The white line on the right, bright and authoritative, was his only real tether. The more the fog thickened, the more the truck's interior felt like a cocoon. The seat's familiar sag under him, the faint smell of old coffee and engine grease, the soft buzzing from the overhead light. These were anchors, small, reassuring proofs that he was still where he was supposed to be. He leaned forward slightly, as if an extra inch might buy him a little more visibility. The road curved gently, then straightened again. A green sign appeared out of nowhere on the shoulder, its letters blurred by the moisture beading on the reflective surface. By the time he registered it, it was already slipping past the passenger window. Mile 147. Daniel frowned, then slid his gaze to the notebook wedged between the seat and the console. He had scribbled his last entry, passing mile 141 40 minutes ago. He smiled to himself. The fog was playing tricks on his sense of distance. It had that strange ability in the dark to stretch or compress time. The miles rolled on like that, indistinguishable and soft around the edges. The road rose slightly, dipped, straightened. Occasionally, a narrow driveway or a break in the tree line hinted at a farmhouse or field hidden beyond. The fog felt lower now, pressing nearer to the hood, gliding just above the asphalt like a living thing. He passed another marker. Mile 143. He blinked. That wasn't right. He had passed 147 not long ago. The numbers should be climbing, not falling. The clock still read 12:17 a.m. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and told himself he'd misread the first sign. The fog, the hour, the monotony, any of it could be playing with his memory. He was not the first tired driver to blink at a mile marker and see what he expected instead of what was really there. Another stretch of road, the hum of the tires on the pavement like a low lullaby. His eyelids felt heavy in that way that was more about repetition than actual fatigue. The constant sameness of the view made his brain want to disengage. The next green sign materialized, shiny with mist. Mile 147. The numbers were unmistakable, glowing back at him in the beams. He turned his head this time, watching the marker slip by, watching it vanish into the rearview mirror. The fog took it back. A small, cold place opened quietly beneath his ribs. He told himself there must be an old service road, a crossing of highways he hadn't noticed, a quirk in the numbering. Roads were patched together all the time. Sometimes the mile counts restarted or did strange things where different state departments met lines on a map. The explanation sounded thin in his own mind, but it was something. He adjusted his hands on the wheel and tried to listen more carefully to the engine, focusing on its reassuring drone. Gradually, almost too slowly to notice, another shape began to form ahead on the right side of the road, something low and angular beyond the white line. At first, Daniel took it for another sign, maybe a reflective barrier. As he approached, it resolved into a squat building sitting close to the highway, a muted glow behind clouded windows. A diner or something like one. Its sign was an older style, the letters in blocky red script set against a faded yellow background. The fog made it look soft at the edges. He caught a few words as he passed, just long enough to register them. Highway Haven. The parking lot was empty, ghostly in the mist. No cars, no trucks, no lights besides the faint, steady glow from inside. He caught the impression of red vinyl booths, a counter, the suggestion of a waitress shape moving somewhere within. By the time he craned his neck to get a better look, the building had receded into the rear view, a box of light swallowed quickly. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 12:17 a.m. It must be wrong, the clock had to be wrong. It was old after all, a loose wire, a failing bulb. He flicked his eyes to his phone, plugged in near the dash. 12:17 a.m. blinked calmly on the screen. The truck devoured another stretch of asphalt. Daniel's breath seemed loud in his ears, though nothing in the cab had changed. The same faint rattle from the thermos. The same low whine of wind sneaking in around the door seal. The same constant, patient hum of the tires. The fog thickened further. Now it was not just a low cloud but a tunnel, swirling as his headlights cut through it, as if he were driving into the breath of some sleeping beast. The sides of the road had become a gray blur. The sense of motion came more from the slight vibrations through the wheel than from anything he could see. Another sign burgeoned into existence ahead. Mile 147. He felt rather than heard himself exhale. The numbers glowed damply, unbothered, serene. He slowed slightly, more out of some instinctive awe than caution. The odometer had moved. The fuel gauge was different from the last time he had checked. He was undeniably traveling, burning fuel, turning wheels, but the sign did not change. His gaze caught something beyond it, a softer brightness bleeding through the fog further ahead, low to the ground and rectangular. The diner again. Highway Haven. Same faded sign, same parking lot, same interior glow, as if someone had turned on all the lights and forgotten to unlock the door. This time he noticed the open sign, a small neon rectangle in the front window glowing a soft, unwavering blue. Open, it declared. The letters looked oddly indifferent to the hour and the emptiness. The part of his mind that tracked logbooks and deliveries told him he should keep going. Keep to the schedule. Ignore the oddness and file it away as another strange roadside story to tell later. The other part, the one that remembered childhood nights with unexplained sounds in the house and curtains moving with no breeze, watched the diner slip by and found itself wanting desperately to stop, just to see if the door would open, just to confirm that the building was not some strange mirage conjured by the fog and his own tiredness. He didn't stop. The road resumed. The fog pressed around him. He felt the truck as if it were floating, disconnected from the ground. He was aware of the steady, realist rhythm of the engine, of the tiny tremors in the steering wheel, of the faint squeaks from the dashboard where it had been opened and closed too many times. But all of it felt slightly staged, like the sounds in a soundscape played over something else. The radio hissed. A voice seeped through the static so softly that he almost missed it. 17 mile 147. It was his own voice. Daniel's hand slid to the CB mic on reflex, fingers wrapping around the worn plastic. He hadn't spoken into it for at least an hour. The last words he'd said had been to himself, a murmured reminder to check his fuel at the next town. The CB crackled again, and for a moment the cab filled with a faint echo, a washed-out version of the very thought in his head, as if someone had recorded his inner monologue and was playing it back through a bad speaker. Should have stopped, maybe the coffee's better. The words were fractured, stretched, as if the signal had to travel very far through something not meant for voices. He dropped the mic back into its cradle without pressing the transmit button. The tiny click of plastic on plastic sounded abnormally loud. He checked the clock once more. 12:17 a.m. His hands felt too warm on the wheel. He flexed his fingers, one at a time, listening to the tiny pops in his knuckles. The warmth wasn't from the heater. It was from the slow flood of adrenaline that came with the quiet recognition that whatever was happening was no longer easily explainable. The next mile marker rose up through the fog like something surfacing from deep water. Mile 147. The diner's glow followed, soft and unhurried, as if on cue from some stage director. This time, as he approached, the open sign in the window began to blink, the blue letters pulsing gently. Open, dark, open, dark. He breathed in and out, the fog outside seeming to sync with the rhythm. Without fully deciding to, his foot moved to the brake, pressing gently. The truck responded, its weight shifting forward in that familiar, controlled way. The engine dropped in tone. The world seemed to slow with it. He signaled out of habit, though there was no one behind him to see, and turned into the diner's parking lot. The pavement beneath his wheels changed texture, the subtle music of rubber on rougher asphalt letting him know he had left the highway. He eased the truck to a stop facing the building, headlights illuminating the front windows in a bright wash that made the interior details snap into clearer view. Red vinyl booths, chrome-edged tables, a counter with round stools, each capped with cracked red leather. Behind the counter, shelves of plates and cups. A pie case holding something that might have been chocolate, might have been nothing at all. The surfaces were clean, but there was a faint haze to everything, as if he were looking at a photograph rather than a real room. No movement, no waitress, no cook, no overnight trucker hunched over coffee. The open sign continued its steady pulse in the corner of the window. He turned off the engine. Silence fell with a suddenness that made his ears ring. The ticking of the cooling engine filled the cab, a series of small metallic pops that seemed, in the absence of the motor's hum, almost conversational. The fog pressed in around the truck, sliding lazily over the hood, wrapping its edges in softness. The world beyond the diner and the immediate patch of parking lot was an indistinct gray shroud. For a moment, Daniel simply sat, hands resting on his thighs, listening to the quiet. The heater fan wound down. The dash lights seemed to grow brighter without the competition of the headlights. He opened the door. The night air met him like a cool, damp hand. It smelled of wet pavement, old leaves, and something else he couldn't place. A faint, sweet note like distant baking or warmed sugar. The fog brushed his face, leaving fine droplets on his eyelashes. His boots hit the asphalt with a hollow sound that carried farther than it should have, echoing softly against the building's facade and then disappearing into the cotton silence. The diner's door was old-fashioned, with a metal handle and a rectangular window at eye level. A small bell was wired above it, the kind that would jingle whenever someone entered. Through the glass, the interior looked just as it had from the truck, frozen in that timeless, slightly faded way. He hesitated for a breath, his hand hovering inches from the handle, the fog curling around his sleeve. The need to know whether this place was real, whether someone was inside, why the road had folded itself around these same 30 miles over and over, was a tangible thing, pressing against his chest from the inside. His fingers closed around the handle. The metal was not cold. It was exactly the temperature of his skin, as if someone had just let go of it moments before. For an instant, he had the uncanny sensation that his hand was closing around another invisible hand, that there was an overlap of touch. He pulled. The door opened easily without creak or protest. The bell above it chimed, bright and clear, the sound startling in the empty night. Warmth spilled out, carrying with it the smell of coffee and something baking, cinnamon, maybe, and sugar, and a hint of lemon. The interior lights were not harsh. They were a gentle, amber glow that made everything look soft and inviting, as if this were a safe harbor tucked away from the rest of the world. He stepped inside. For a heartbeat, there was the distinct impression that the diner had been in the middle of something just before he arrived. A coffee pot sitting half full on a warmer, faint steam rising. A cloth draped over one stool. A door to the back swinging minutely, as if it had just moved. A jukebox in the corner humming quietly, though no song played. Yet there was no one. He stood, listening. The bell above the door gave one final tremble and stilled. The ticking of a clock over the counter marked the seconds, each one a small footstep into something he did not fully understand. The clock's hands pointed to 12:17. Daniel realized then that the fog outside the windows was pressed right up against the glass, a flat wall of whiteness. The highway had vanished from view. There was nothing beyond the diner now but a diffuse, luminous gray that glowed faintly with its own light, obscuring everything else. Behind him, the door eased itself closed with a soft click. For a moment, he thought about turning around, about planting his palm against the glass to see if it was still cool, still solid, still leading back to his truck and the looping mile markers and the long, lonely road. Instead, he found himself moving forward, toward the counter, drawn by the soft warmth and the smell of coffee. His boots made dull sounds on the tile. He could feel every thread of the stitched floor mat under his soles when he stepped over it. On the counter sat a small, handwritten sign next to an old-fashioned bell. Welcome, it said on one side. On the other, facing him, words waited in neat, careful script. We've been expecting you, Daniel. He did not remember telling anyone his name. The clock on the wall ticked. 12:18. Story number 2. The first fog bank rolled over the interstate like a tide crossing a beach, soft and silent and strangely deliberate. One moment the sky was wide and sharp with stars above the high desert plateau, and the next it was as if someone had drawn a veil between Marissa Cole and the rest of the world. The headlights of her Kenworth met the fog and seemed to stop, their beams flattened and folded into a glowing wall just beyond the hood. The line where clear air became milk-white haze was so clean it looked drawn with a ruler. In the mirrors, the trailer lights floated in their own little pocket of visibility, red dots suspended in nothing. Inside the cab, the world was small, familiar, and warm. The dash was a soft constellation of green needles and amber backlights. An old air freshener long since spent still swung lazily from the turn signal stalk, moving to some rhythm older than the road. The heater hummed comfortingly, blowing a dry, faintly dusty warmth across her boots. The CB, set low, crackled occasionally with far-off voices that never quite resolved into words. Marissa rolled her shoulders, feeling the faint stiffness that came from too many hours sitting, too many miles counted by the whir of tires on asphalt. According to the GPS perched on the dash, she was somewhere between nowhere and nowhere else, threading a high stretch of Interstate 23 through scrubland and broken rock. The map showed a thin gray line curving through darker shading and a scattering of meaningless place names: Dry Creek, Mesa View, Mile Zero. The last town, if 3 buildings and a gas pump could be called that, had fallen behind more than an hour ago. The next official rest area, according to the green sign she'd seen, was 40 miles ahead. She had been counting down to it, not because she was exhausted, but because the solitude out here had a way of getting inside a person's head. Even the glow of a lonely vending machine and the sight of another human form under harsh fluorescent lights took on the sheen of luxury. Her phone, plugged in by a frayed cord, glowed on the console. No service. The little symbol in the corner was an empty outline. The road under her wheels began a slow, imperceptible climb. The engine note changed slightly, a deeper, more intent hum. The dense band of fog ahead rose with it, swallowing the low stars, reaching down to touch the sagebrush on either side of the highway. It came in layers, in sheets, some thin enough to see vague shapes behind them, some so thick that the world ended in a soft gray blanket a few truck lengths ahead. She eased back a little on the throttle, hands tightening fractionally on the wheel. The lane lines glowed back in sharp white, assertive and reassuring. Their regular dash, solid, gap, became a rhythm in her mind. Something in that rhythm changed. She didn't notice it at first. It was subtle, like a song moving from one key to another. The lines seemed to stretch slightly under her gaze as if each dash were just a little longer than the last. The distance between them grew. Then, abruptly, they snapped back to normal. Marissa blinked hard, pushed at the corners of her eyes with the heel of her hand, and let out a low breath. "Fog brain," she muttered into the empty cab. "Knock it off." The radio scan button caught her eye. On instinct, she pressed it, listening as the tuner rolled past empty frequencies. Static, a fragment of country music, more static. What sounded like an old ballad, tinny and distant, then nothing but hiss. She thumbed the CB, more for company than hope. "Breaker 19, anyone else playing Submarine through this soup on 23, she said, keeping her tone light, almost casual. The speaker hissed, made a soft popping noise and fell silent. She thought of the last stop, the old man behind the counter remarking on the fog. "It rolls in odd up there," he'd said, sliding her change across the counter with a calloused hand. "You hit it just right, feels like you're driving through another world. Watch your markers." "Watch your markers." The green glow of the dash clock drew her attention for a moment. 3:06 a.m. Outside, the fog thickened until it seemed to press directly against the glass. Her headlights found it and made it shine, but the light didn't appear to go anywhere. It just existed, a hovering, glowing volume in front of her. She almost missed the sign. It emerged out of the haze on the right, reflective surface, gleaming with beads of moisture like 2 bright stars. The letters flashed past in the beam before her mind had fully registered them. Rest area 1 mile. Last chance before mile 0. She frowned. She studied the route earlier. There had been no mention of an extra rest area before the mile 0 marker, just the one at 40 miles. Maybe it was new. Maybe her atlas was out of date. Maybe, she thought with a small, humorless smile, she'd give anything a last chance sign wanted to offer at 3 in the morning. The idea of stepping out of the cab into cool air, stretching, hearing some sound other than her own engine appealed more than she wanted to admit. Her thermos was almost empty. The coffee inside had gone lukewarm an hour ago. She watched for the usual signs as she rolled forward. 1/2 mile, then exit-only lanes, the familiar icon of a bed and a tree or a blue rest area sign with pictogram restrooms. Nothing appeared. The fog pressed in. The road climbed a little more. Her knuckles were very white on the wheel when another green rectangle rose out of the mist. Mile 2. The numbers shone wetly, impossibly near to the purported rest area ahead. Weird, she thought, but not impossible. Some stretches had odd numbering schemes. Maybe the last chance bit was a joke about some town border. The thought rolled around her head, dull and unconvincing. The first hint of the rest area was not visual, but textural. A subtle change in the way the sound bounced inside the cab. The space around the truck felt like it had opened slightly. The tight, muffled quality that came from trees and rock close to the road loosened. The fog seemed to lift just enough to reveal a break in the right-hand guardrail, a dark mouth branching off the interstate. Blue light flickered faintly somewhere beyond the fog wall. A sign swam into view on the shoulder, so close she had to turn her head to read it as she passed. Rest area mile 0. Open 24 hours. The arrow pointed right, sure of itself. No such dot marked her GPS. The screen showed nothing but the gray line of the interstate, unbroken. The little icon of her truck slid serenely forward. She signaled, eased into the deceleration lane, feeling the slight pull as the rougher pavement of the exit ramp met her tires. The blue light ahead resolved into the harsh glow of overhead lamps on tall poles, their beams truncated by fog so they formed islands of pallid brightness in an ocean of gray. The rest area appeared between one breath and the next, flat, concrete, and strangely generic. A low building with a peaked roof, vending machines glowing softly behind glass, a scattering of picnic tables under skeletal trees whose leaves had long since given up. The parking lot was mostly empty. One sedan near the far edge, beads of moisture glistening on its windows, and an older box truck parked crookedly as if its driver had pulled in bone-tired. Marissa guided the Kenworth into a pull-through space, shifted into neutral, and set the brake. The engine settled into idle, then, at her touch, went quiet. The sudden absence of vibration made her realize how much her body had tuned itself to it. Silence rushed in to fill the space the engine had left, not quite total. There were still soft sounds, small sounds. The faint hiss of air escaping some part of the truck's complex systems, the distant hum of fluorescent lights, a whispering patter of invisible droplets striking metal and glass. She sat for a moment, hands resting on her thighs, breathing. The cab felt larger with the engine off, hollowed in some way. Without the forward momentum, the fog seemed to crowd closer to the windshield, flattening against it like frosted glass. The clock on the dash read 3:06 a.m. It had been 3:06 when she saw the last chance sign. She pushed the thought aside, grabbed her thermos, and slid out of the driver's seat. The metal step was slick under her boot, tiny droplets of condensation already forming. The fog wrapped around her as she dropped to the pavement, a cool, damp embrace that softened all edges. The air smelled of wet concrete and faintly of something green, shrubs, perhaps, or the ghost of desert plants exhaling coolness. Underneath that, like a thread through fabric, was the faint scent of diesel and hot rubber. Her footsteps rang dully on the walkway as she approached the building. The automatic doors slid open a heartbeat later than she expected, as though they had been slow to notice her. Warm, artificially cooled air brushed her face, carrying with it the clean, chemical tang of disinfectant and the slightly sweet smell of cheap coffee. The interior was exactly how 100 other rest areas had been. Beige tile, harsh ceiling lights buzzing faintly, a bank of vending machines humming like self-contained ecosystems against one wall, their contents colorful and strangely luminous. A bulletin board with neatly arranged flyers, road conditions, tourist attractions, a faded poster about wildfire safety. A wall clock above the vending machine said 3:06. In the far corner, by a row of molded plastic chairs, sat a man in a dark jacket and baseball cap, his eyes closed, head tilted back. His hands were folded around a disposable coffee cup gone slack in his grasp. The cup had buckled slightly near the lid, as if it had been held that way for a long time. Marissa hesitated halfway across the entryway. She waited for some small movement, some sign of breath. After a second, the man's chest rose and fell, barely perceptible. He was only asleep. Some of the tension inside her unwound. She moved toward the coffee machines, each step clicking softly on the tiles. The industrial urns gleamed under the lights, the freshly brewed signs hanging cheerfully beneath spigots that had seen better days. She poured, watching the dark liquid arc into her thermos, smelling its familiar bitterness. The simple, ordinary act grounded her, pulled her mind back from the fog and the strange clock and the unmarked rest area. Behind her, the man in the chair shifted slightly. The sound was small, the faint rustle of fabric and the creak of plastic under weight. She heard him exhale, a soft, almost relieved sigh. "You picked a good night to stop," he said, without opening his eyes. His voice was low, roughened at the edges, carrying something that might have been amusement, might have been something else. Marissa replaced the urn, turned, and regarded him. "Fog's getting thick out there," she said. "Figured I'd wait it out a bit." His cap hid much of his face, but she could make out a strong jaw, the hint of stubble, the worn brim's shadow cutting across his features. His jacket was the kind you bought once and wore for 15 winters, soft at the cuffs, frayed at the pockets. "Fog's always thick at mile 0, he said. "That's kind of the point." She glanced toward the vending machines, the bulletin board, the bland, comforting sameness of the place. "There are mile 0 around here?" she asked. "Didn't see much on the map." He made a quiet sound that wasn't exactly a laugh. "Maps don't always bother with it," he replied, "but the road knows." Something in his tone made the tiny hairs along her arms rise. It wasn't ominous, exactly. More like he was reciting something remembered, a phrase worn smooth by many tellings. "You heading east or west?" he asked. "West," she said. "Salt Lake Way, you?" "Depends," he said, "on the night." His fingers tightened slightly around the coffee cup, leaving faint indentations in the cardboard. The cup itself looked untouched, no coffee stains near the lid, no steam. "What's at mile 0?" she asked, keeping her voice casual, letting it blend with the hum of the vending machines and the distant whir of the hand dryers in the restrooms. He tilted his head back further, his face tipping more fully into shadow. For a moment, the overhead lights buzzed louder, as if picking up a stray charge in the air. "Depends what you brought with you," he said. The answer was unsatisfying, slippery. She took a sip of coffee, feeling its warmth spread down into her chest. The clock ticked loudly above the vending machines, though she couldn't see the second hand move. It remained at 3:06. She turned away from the man, telling herself it didn't matter, that he was just another driver half asleep, muttering the kind of vague road folklore that passed long hours. She studied the bulletin board instead. All the flyers were current. The dates on the road closure notices on the community events were this month, this week. A small laminated card in the center read, "Welcome to mile 0 rest area. Drive safely. Rest well." She didn't remember seeing the rest area marked on the Department of Transportation website either. Her gaze found a small, rectangular map under the welcome card. It showed a simplified diagram, the interstate, a dot for the rest area, the numbers counting down in one direction, up in the other. The dot for the rest area was labeled simply, "You are here." Her own reflection looked back at her faintly in the plastic covering the map. For a moment, she had the eerie sensation that the reflection's eyes were not quite aligned with her own. The automatic doors whispered open behind her, Cool fog curled in around her ankles. A woman entered, her figure a dark cutout against the pale gray outside. She moved with purpose, boots sounding sharply on the tile. Marissa glanced up, then froze. The woman could have been her at a glance. Same height, same slope to the shoulders under a worn hoodie, same long braid thrown over one shoulder. The bill of the cap was pulled low, but the curve of the jaw, the tilt of the head, were achingly familiar, like seeing a photo of herself from a slightly different angle. The woman did not look her way. She walked straight past, toward the restrooms, ghosting by with the soft scrape of denim. As she passed, Marissa caught a whiff of her scent, diesel coffee, the faint sweetness of some cheap truck stop soap. Her own soap. Her heart thudded once, heavy and disjointed. The coffee in her hand seemed suddenly too warm. She turned quickly, intent on calling out, on making some small joke about twin days on the road. But the hallway to the restrooms was empty. The door at its end was swinging slowly, as if someone had just passed through. No footsteps sounded. No flush, no water, no hand dryer roared to life. The man in the chair hadn't moved, but his head had turned, ever so slightly, in the direction of the hallway. The brim of his cap still hid his eyes. "Lots of drivers stop here," he said mildly. "You start to see patterns." Her throat felt dry despite the coffee. She swallowed. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "Depends," he said again, "on the night." The clock above the vending machines ticked. 3:06 a.m. Marissa checked her phone. 3:06. A fine tremor ran through the coffee in her thermos, making faint ripples on the surface. Something outside changed. It was impossible to say what exactly, only that the quality of the light through the glass doors shifted, as if the fog had thickened or thinned in some subtle way. The sense of being in a bubble, a pocket carved out of the night, intensified. She thought of the interstate stretching away in both directions, white lines and red taillights, invisible behind the wall of fog. She thought of the last chance sign, and the way the mile markers had counted down without her noticing. She thought of the woman who had passed, a version of herself, or a trick of light and fatigue. "This place," she began, then let the words trail off. The man finally opened his eyes. They were tired eyes, lined at the corners, the kind of eyes that had watched many dawns from behind a windshield. But there was something else in them too, a curious, quiet resignation, as if he had been sitting with the same thought for a very long time. "Some stretches of road," he said. "They're just pavement, concrete, dirt, nothing more. And some," he gestured with his coffee cup, a small, encompassing motion that took in the walls, the humming machines, the fog pressed against the glass. "Some remember. Once enough people pass through, leave pieces of themselves behind, worries, hopes, the things they don't say out loud. The road starts carrying those too." Marissa listened, the way one listened to weather reports and wayward advice at midnight truck stops. "And mile zero?" she asked. "Mile zero's where they settle sometimes," he said softly. "Where the road folds a bit, gives you back what you brought, just turned a different way, lets you see it, if you want to." A silence settled between them, not awkward but full. He looked past her, toward the glass doors, where the fog had drawn itself into a pale, glowing curtain. "When you go back out," he said, "the mile marker will say 1, or maybe you'll miss it. The clock will start again, traffic will pick up. You'll tell yourself this was just a late-night stop like any other. That's fine. The road doesn't mind what you believe." He paused. "Just pay attention to who's sitting in your seat." She could feel the rhythm of her own heartbeat now, steady but a fraction too fast. She wanted to ask a dozen questions. About the rest area, about how often he'd been here, about the version of her that had slipped silently down the hall. Instead, she found herself asking the smallest, most ordinary thing. "What about you?" she said. "You heading back out?" He smiled then, a small, almost imperceptible curve at one corner of his mouth. "Depends," he said, "on the night." The coffee in his hand did not steam. His clothes did not carry the sheen of moisture from the fog, as hers did. She checked the clock again, 3:06. The air inside the rest area felt momentarily thinner, as if the building had just exhaled. Marissa tightened the lid on her thermos, the metal thread scraping in a faint, comforting sound. The desire to be back in her cab, with her hands on the wheel and the familiar view of the road ahead, even if it was swallowed in fog, rose up strong and insistent. "Guess I'll take my chances," she said quietly. He nodded, not in approval or disapproval, but in understanding. At the door, as it slid open, the fog met her again, gentle and cool, wrapping its fingers around her like a polite escort. The Kenworth loomed out of the gray, a solid, reassuring shape. Beyond it, somewhere unseen, the interstate waited. She climbed back into the cab, shut the door, and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel, feeling the faint imprint of the rest area on her skin. The too-still clock, the quiet man, the ghost of herself disappearing down a hallway. She started the engine. The familiar roar filled the space, pushing back the silence. The dash lights brightened a little, as if in response. The clock blinked once and rolled over. 3:07 a.m. She eased the truck back onto the exit ramp, then onto the interstate. The fog swallowed her once more, but the lane lines glowed steady and clear. The tires whispered against the asphalt. A green sign appeared on the right, its presence oddly soothing. Mile 1. No mention of Mile 0. No blue rest area symbol. No last chance. Just the number shining calmly in the mist. She reached for the radio, then stopped, her hand hovering in the air. For a moment unbidden, she imagined glancing at the passenger seat and seeing herself sitting there, hands folded, watching. She imagined having a conversation she'd never had allowed about the miles behind and the miles ahead. Her hand drifted back to the wheel instead. The fog thinned by degrees as she drove. The stars returned, one by one, punching through the softness until the sky was once more a deep, velvety bowl overhead. The road unrolled clean and quiet in her headlights. The hum of the tires became a lullaby again. By the time the official rest area at Mile 40 appeared, with its familiar blue signs, its busier parking lot, its buzzing snack machines, Mile 0 felt like a half-remembered dream, a trick of fatigue and fog, a story overheard. She pulled past the rest area without stopping. In the side mirror, for just a second, the reflection of her truck seemed to hold another shape, riding alongside in the passenger seat. A suggestion of a head turned toward her, of eyes bright and interested. Then the mirror caught the glare of another driver's headlights, and the image dissolved into white. The CB crackled to life then, an anonymous voice writing the static. "Keep it steady out there westbound," it said. "Fog's funny tonight, feels like the road's thinking." Marissa considered the words, the way they echoed something she had just left behind. "Copy that," she said quietly, thumb easing over the transmit key. "I'll keep an eye on Mile 0. There was a pause on the other end, a crackle like distant rain. 10-4, the voice replied. "Some miles you only see once." The radio fell silent again. The Kenworth rolled on, its small island of light moving steadily through the waiting dark. The road stretched ahead, endless and indifferent, carrying with it whatever each driver brought, whatever they chose to leave behind. Behind her, somewhere in the fog that had settled back over the high plateau, a rest area that didn't exist on any map waited in its pool of fluorescent glow, clock fixed, doors sliding, ready for whoever needed to stop at Mile 0 next. Story number 3. Out along the ragged edge of the continent, where the land broke off into cliffs and black water, the fog came in from the sea like something with its own intentions. It rolled over the highway in quiet, persistent waves, not dramatic, not sudden, but so steady that Jonah Rivera could watch it creep up the line of his hood, bead on the mirrors, and finally swallow the road entirely. The ocean lay somewhere to his left, hidden now. Earlier, when the night had still been clear, he could see the faint white flashes of surf far below whenever the guardrail broke. He could smell salt and old kelp on the wind. Now the scent of the sea was woven tightly into the fog, pulled close to the asphalt, wrapped around his Kenworth like a cool, damp blanket. Inside the cab, the world was a different, smaller shape. The dashboard glowed with low amber and green lights, little islands of certainty in the soft darkness. The hum of the engine was a deep, comforting thing, steady as a heartbeat. His coffee, half gone in the holder, smelled faintly bitter and familiar. An old fleece jacket hung from the hook on the sleeper wall behind him, swaying gently every time the road took a bend. Jonah liked this stretch of Highway 7 in the daylight, when the cliffs dropped dramatically to the water and the gulls wheeled overhead. At night, it felt like driving along the edge of an idea. The highway twisted and leaned against the shape of the coastline, curving around coves and headlands. Every few miles, a turnout or a weather-beaten picnic area appeared, then vanished again in the rear view, claimed by distance and mist. The clock in the dash read 1:42 a.m. He had started this leg of the run a little before sunset, hauling a refrigerated load of produce north toward the city where the harbor cranes would be waiting in the gray of early morning. If he kept a steady pace, he would roll into the distribution yard just as the sky began to light. It was a timetable he knew well, the kind of run where the distances had long since become muscle memory. The CB, tuned low, murmured with far-off voices, little bursts of chatter stitched between long waves of static. Most of the other long-haul drivers had taken the inland interstate tonight, away from the marine layer and the hairpin curves. Out here, Jonah shared the road mostly with the occasional sedan from some coastal town and the odd delivery van, its driver hunched forward against the strain of the fog. He passed a sign, a tall, modern board with changeable text, that loomed out of the mist and slid by his window like a quiet warning. Coastal highway conditions ahead. Use caution, low visibility. The words glowed pale orange against black, beads of moisture shining on the metal frame. He eased off the throttle by a fraction. The lane lines on the wet pavement returned the light from his beams faithfully, glowing bright white on either side of his tires, marking the path with comforting regularity. Beyond them, the world was nothing but soft gray. Ahead, the road curved around a headland. He could feel the shape of it in the wheel and the subtle lean of the cab. His hands shifted slightly, the way they had countless times before, following a pattern his muscles knew even if his eyes could no longer see the wider landscape. The sign appeared suddenly, standing on thin legs by the shoulder like something that had grown there out of metal and plastic instead of wood and leaves. Primary route closed AT mile 213. Old coastal bypass available. Follow detour. Jonah blinked, the words hanging in his mind a heartbeat longer than the sign itself hung in his headlights. Primary route closed. He hadn't heard any mention on the radio about a closure out here, no construction alerts, no weather warnings. An old coastal bypass sounded like a phrase borrowed from another decade. He cleared his throat, more to break the strange stillness in the cab than from any real need, and reached out to tap the GPS perched on the dash. The map flickered for a second, recalculating. The thin blue line of Highway 7, hugging the digital coastline, broke at a point ahead. A tiny triangular icon appeared, blinking amber, labeled. Road closed ahead, detour via Old Coast 7. A new line drew itself on the screen, pale and hesitant. It left the main highway just before the closure, arcing seaward in a ghostly curve before rejoining the original route further north. The label along it was faint, almost translucent, Old Coast 7. His atlas, tucked between the passenger seat and the console, contained no mention of an alternate route out here. Highway 7 had been the only road along this cliffside strip for as long as he had driven it. The fog thickened, as if reacting to his hesitation. It pressed more firmly against the windshield, muffling sound, making the cab feel like a sealed capsule gliding through cloud. He thumbed the CB, voice low. "Breaker 19, anyone up on 7 near 200 northbound? You hearing about a closure up around the 213 mark?" The speaker crackled, hissed, then fell quiet. Only static answered him, the soft, endless sound of distant nothing. He waited, fingers resting lightly on the mic. Somewhere in that static, a shape of a voice almost formed, a rise and fall that might have been words spoken far away, a syllable he half recognized, but then it snapped back to noise. The next sign stood out of the fog like another question. "Primary route closed 5 miles. All northbound traffic exit, right AT Old Coastal bypass." The arrow pointed confidently towards some unseen ramp. Jonah weighed his options. Continuing on might mean reaching a hard barricade at the closure, forcing him to backtrack miles along a fog-choked, narrow highway. The inland interstate detour would add hours he didn't have, chipping away at the margin between his arrival and the unloading window. The GPS line glowed softly, insisting the bypass existed. He drew in a slow breath, tasting salt and cold in the air. Old road or not, detour or not, the truck and the freight still had to move. The sea, unseen beyond the guardrail, kept its own counsel. 2 miles later, the break in the highway emerged, the fog parting just enough to reveal a downward curving exit lane on the right. A newer, brighter sign marked it. "Old Coast 7 bypass. Northbound only." Jonah put on his signal, the soft tick-tick-tick filling the cab like a metronome, and guided the Kenworth into the lane. The pavement under the wheels changed texture almost immediately, the smooth hum of the main highway giving way to a faint, granular vibration. The yellow reflectors embedded between the lanes were of an older, more rounded style, their glass eyes catching his headlights in a series of watery glints. A low barrier separated the bypass from the unseen edge of the cliff. Beyond it, there was only fog, thick and luminous, glowing faintly with reflected headlight. As he followed the curve of the ramp, the overhead signs of the main highway disappeared into the mist above. The sound of distant surf, which had been a low background murmur all along, grew a little louder, as if the bypass dropped closer to the water before swinging back. The ramp leveled out, then straightened, becoming once again a 2-lane road. This one felt narrower, though the lane markings measured out the same distances. The worn center line was a faded yellow, and the white shoulder markings were more interrupted, broken in several places where the paint had thinned away. To his right, the cliff rose in a steep wall, slick with moisture, its surface blurred by fog. To his left, beyond the barrier, there was nothing to see but pale, restless gray. The detour signs were gone now. There were no mile markers, no familiar green plaques with white numbers. Only the road, the guardrail, the fog, and the soft drum of waves somewhere below. The radio, which had been a soft murmur of static, shifted. A voice came in, faint and thin, threaded through with the hiss of distance. "Old 7, you boys talkin' the lower route tonight, fog's a bear down there." The timbre of the voice was odd, a little higher, a little flatter than most he was used to, and the language had a slightly old-fashioned ring. Jonah reached for the CB again. "Copy eastbound," he said, automatically using old highway habits. "This is northbound on Old Coast 7. You talking my stretch?" There was a pause, then more static, then the same voice, warmer now, amused. "Northbound on Old Coast," it said. "Haven't heard anyone call it that in years. You must be new to the Ghost Road, friend." Jonah's fingers tightened a fraction around the mic. "Dispatch sent me this way on account of a closure," he said, keeping his tone level. "Just following the signs. Didn't know it had a name." "All roads have names," the voice replied, easy and conversational. "Some just forget theirs for a while." In the cab, the clock read 2:03. The green digits glowed calmly, casting a faint, electronic hue on the underside of the visor above. "Name Jonah," he said, then wondered why he had volunteered it. The laughter that came through the speaker was gentle. "Well now, Jonah," the voice said, "welcome to Old Coast 7. You watch your mirrors on the span. Fog likes to show you things there." Before he could ask what that meant, the CB cracked sharply and dissolved back into hiss. No amount of adjusting the squelch dial brought the voice back, for all the radio offered him. He was once again the only person speaking into the night. The bypass rolled on. The road tilted first one way, then the other, tracing the unseen contours of the coastline. The fog never thinned, but its texture changed, breaking into softer curls, forming thicker banks that he could almost imagine as shapes trying to coalesce. He passed a turnout on the right, little more than a shallow bay of crumbling pavement and a rusting trash barrel. For a moment, he thought he saw the outline of an older truck parked there, cabover style, the faint suggestion of a company name along its trailer in a script he couldn't quite decipher. Its marker lights glowed dully, like embers on the verge of going out. When he glanced into the side mirror for a better look, the turnout was empty. The next stretch of road felt subtly different under his wheels, a smoother segment as if it had been resurfaced at some point long ago. The seams between sections made tiny, rhythmic thumps as he rolled over them. Thump, 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 a new kind of heartbeat. To his left, the fog lightened for a moment, thinning just enough to reveal a darker mass beyond. A shape loomed, long and horizontal, its outline traced by a row of twin lights that seemed to hang in the air. A bridge. At first, Jonah saw only pieces of it, the near end, where the guardrail gave way to a more open barrier of vertical bars, and the faint glow of lights marching away into the fog. Then the structure asserted itself in full, a low, sweeping span that reached out into the gray and vanished, its far side completely obscured. An old sign stood before the entrance to the bridge, its reflective coating worn and patchy. Skyline Viaduct. Speed limit 45. No stopping. The word Skyline shimmered wetly under his headlights, letters ghostly and uneven. His hands shifted on the wheel of their own accord, centering the truck in the lane as he approached the start of the span. A hollow feeling opened in his chest, not fear exactly, but something quieter, like standing on a threshold that he had not entirely meant to reach. The moment his front tires left the familiar sensation of earthbound asphalt and rolled onto the bridge, the sound changed. The low rumble of rubber on pavement was replaced by a softer, faintly ringing tone, as if the concrete of the viaduct had its own resonance. The waves below, previously a muffled backdrop, came up through the structure in a continuous, subterranean hush. The fog over the bridge was even thicker, as if the sea had claimed this place more firmly than the road behind. The sodium vapor lamps mounted along the railing glowed a dull, uniform amber, their light flattened by the moisture into pale pools on the surface. There was no visible end to the span. It reached forward into a blank, luminous tunnel. Jonah eased his speed down to 40, feeling the weight of the trailer behind him respond, the slight tug as momentum adjusted. He could feel each joint in the bridge through the wheel. Thump, 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 small, regular, like the ticking of some enormous, unseen clock. The CB crackled again, more softly this time. Voices drifted through, overlapping, layers of conversation that did not seem to hear one another. Fog, a pea super tonight, boys. Can't see the stacks on the viaduct. Skyline span again. I swear it's longer every run. Got my old man's rig up here. Can almost hear him cussing this bridge like he used to. Snatches of old slang floated in, phrases from eras of the road layered on top of one another. Jonah recognized company names that had closed their doors decades ago, references to fuel prices that no longer matched any numbers on modern boards. He listened, not speaking, as if a single word from him might cause the voices to realize they had an unintended audience and fall silent. Outside, beyond the thin metal of the cab, the fog pressed close against the bridge's railings. Occasionally, shadows seemed to move within it, quick changes in density, darker streaks that hinted at shapes packing the edge of his vision. Once, in the corner of his eye, he thought he saw another truck running alongside him, just beyond the barrier. Its headlight beams flared briefly in the white haze, then were gone. He checked his mirrors out of habit. In the side glass, his own trailer lights burned red and unwavering. In the convex lower mirror, the bridge's surface unfurled behind him, empty and pale, vanishing into fog that looked no different from that ahead. The odometer on the dash showed steady numbers. 418, then 419. The minute hand on the analog clock, which he preferred over a digital display for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, ticked forward a fraction, its progress slow but sure. Yet there was the distinct sense, growing with each passing section of bridge, that something about time here had gone soft at the edges. He could not have said whether he had been on the Skyline Viaduct for 1 minute or 10. The rhythm of the joints under his wheels was both calming and disorienting, a metronome without a melody. In the far distance of the fog, where the amber glow of the lamps dissolved into a more general brightness, a horn sounded. It was low and long, the kind of sound that might have come from a ship out in the channel, testing its voice against the night. But it had another timbre, too, like a train horn softened by distance, or a truck's air horn heard through layers of water and mist. The CB answered with its own chorus. For a moment, all the overlapping conversations fell quiet, and a single, clearer voice came through. "Don't look too long in the glass northbound," it said, so close and intimate that it might have been in the passenger seat. "Bridge'll show you what you've left behind if you let it. We're not always meant to see it." Jonah's gaze, drawn by those words before he had time to resist, flicked involuntarily to the side window, to the mirror set there in its metal frame. For a heartbeat, he saw only himself, face lit by the pale glow of the dash, eyes a little tired, jaw set in concentration. The usual. Then, layered faintly over his own reflection, like a double-exposed photograph, he saw another version. A younger man, the lines at the corners of his eyes softer, hair darker under the brim of his cap. The patch on the shoulder of his jacket bore a company logo Jonah hadn't worn in years, back before the merger, before the routes had changed. In that faint overlay, the cab looked subtly different too. The radios were older, bulkier. A paper map sat open on the passenger seat, weighed down by a half-empty thermos. The younger version's gaze was turned not toward the road, but into the mirror, eyes wide with the same stunned recognition. For a fragile second, they looked at each other, each seeing the ghost of a possible self layered over the other's face. The bridge joint thumped under the wheels. The moment snapped. The mirror reflected only his current self again, older hands on the wheel, the present dashboard, the thermos in the holder by his thigh. The CB hissed softly, then went quiet. Jonah's chest felt tight, not with fear, but with the strange ache of understanding something he had no words to describe. The Skyline Viaduct, the old coast bypass, the disembodied voices, they were not haunted in the way people whispered at truck stops, not filled with specters in torn clothing or phantom headlights in the night. They were full of echoes, of earlier selves and earlier journeys, of all the small choices that had led drivers to this span over the unseen water. He breathed slowly, in through his nose, out through his mouth, counting the rhythm of the bridge's joints like a lullaby. The engine hummed, the tires rolled, the fog wrapped everything in quiet. Gradually, so slowly he almost didn't notice, the amber light around him began to thin. The fog brightened, then loosened, revealing vague, looming shapes ahead that resolved into the far end of the viaduct. The road rose slightly, climbing off the span and back onto solid land. The bridge's railing gave way once more to the familiar guardrail of the coastal highway. The surface under his tires changed. The low, resonant echo of the viaduct was replaced by the ordinary, unremarkable hum of pavement. A sign waited just beyond the end of the span, its reflective surface pristine and modern. Merge with Highway 7 North. End Old Coast 7. Beyond it, another green board announced. Mile 214. The digits glowed back at him in his headlights, perfectly ordinary. Jonah glanced at the clock. 2:18 a.m. The minute hand had moved. Time, if it had bent out on the bridge, had straightened itself again. He checked the odometer. It showed the miles he would have expected if he had driven straight through. No extra distance, no missing stretch. The CB remained silent. The GPS map had smoothed back into a single, unbroken line hugging the coast. The pale detour, the label Old Coast 7, had vanished. He drove on. The fog, while still present, began to thin, letting the faint outline of the sea return to his peripheral vision. The cliffs regained their edges. The world expanded from its tunnel of gray. At the next turnout, a more modern one with fresh asphalt and a covered picnic table, a tanker truck sat idling, its marker lights bright in the damp air. As Jonah passed, the driver inside raised 2 fingers from the wheel in a small, almost absent-minded salute. For a fleeting instant, the driver's profile, lit by the dashboard, looked familiar in a way that tingled along Jonah's scalp. The angle of the nose, the shape of the chin, the set of the shoulders. It was like catching sight of someone in a crowd who resembled an old friend, only to realize that the resemblance came from a detail deeper than clothing or haircut. He returned the gesture automatically, and the moment was gone. By the time the first faint glow of approaching dawn began to lighten the horizon behind the fog, the bypass, the bridge, the echoing voices had receded in his mind to the place where road stories lived, half told, traded over coffee and idle hours in diners and rest stops. Weeks later, at a truck stop miles inland, he would hear someone at the next table mention the Skyline Viaduct in passing, their voice low. Used to be a nasty piece of road out on Old 7, they'd say. Fog so thick you'd swear you were driven over nothing at all. They closed it years back, tore down most of it, far as I know. And someone else would answer, funny you say that. Buddy of mine swears he took some kind of bypass out there last month. Said the bridge felt longer than he remembered. Clock didn't move right. They would shrug, stir sugar into their coffee, laugh it off as fatigue and faulty memories. Out on the coast, on certain nights when the fog rolled in just so, and the sea breathed heavily against the cliffs, a soft amber glow would appear briefly out over the water, a line of lamps where no bridge officially stood. For a few hours, the Old Coast route would exist again, not on any current map, but in the quiet persistence of the road's own remembrance. And every now and then, a northbound driver, eyes tired, schedule tight, following the polite insistence of a detour sign and a recalculated GPS line, would feel their wheels roll onto a span where echoes watched from the mirrors and voices on the CB spoke from just a little too far away. Story number 4. The flat country rolled out on either side of the highway like a dark, sleeping sea. Fields, invisible beyond a few truck lengths, stretched away under a low ceiling of cloud. Here and there, the red blink of a distant radio tower punctured the haze, winking slowly like something thinking behind a veil. Evelyn Hart's truck was a small, moving island in all that quiet. The Peterbilt's engine hummed a low, even note, steady as breathing. The dashboard lights washed her hands and the lower half of her face in muted green. The gauges glowed like polite, attentive eyes. An empty coffee cup rattled faintly in its holder every time the rig hit a seam in the pavement. Out ahead, the highway ran arrow straight, a twin ribbon of gray divided by a clean yellow line. The shoulders faded into darkness, then into the hint of low-lying fog that had begun to gather in the shallow ditches and hollows. It was the kind of mist that hugged the earth at first, a thin ghost of moisture that tractors kicked up in the early mornings and that headlights teased into visible currents at night. Her logbook, folded open on the passenger seat, told a simple story. Picked up frozen goods outside St. Louis, running north on Route 61 toward a distribution hub near the Iowa line. According to the digital clock on the dash, it was 2:09 a.m. According to the GPS, she was moving across a pale line through a pale expanse. The next marked town, Hardin's Cross, lay 20 miles ahead. The radio scan button clicked under her thumb. Stations flitted past, snatches of old rock, a burst of farm report, a late-night call-in show where someone was telling a story about losing their keys and finding them in the freezer. None held her. The night had a way of making every voice sound a little distant, every song a little too aware of itself. On the CB, Channel 19 was mostly quiet. A few local drivers traded weather notes. Someone complained amiably about dispatch. Far away, under everything, there was the soft, constant hiss of open airwaves. The fog began to rise. At first, it was just a thicker patch in a roadside hollow, a brief swirl of milky whiteness at ground level that her headlights caught and illuminated. Then another. Then the faint suggestion of a continuous layer stretching between fence rows, as if someone had poured cream into the low parts of the world. Evelyn watched it with a quiet kind of attention. She had driven through every variety of weather, blizzards that erased the world, dust storms that turned the sky a flat, gridded brown, rains that bounced off the hood in shining sheets. But ground fog had its own personality. It didn't so much fall as gather. It moved differently, creeping, choosing places. The miles ticked by. The fog climbed. It rose up out of the ditches, folded itself over the pavement, and spread in lazy sheets that began to erase the little details of the night. The fence posts on either side of the highway became suggestion only. The reflectors, once bright and crisp in her beams, turned soft at the edges. Soon the road ahead was a pale tunnel. Her headlights pushed only a short distance into it, their beams flattening against the haze and glowing there, unable to penetrate. The road's surface itself reflected back a muted shine. The center line and shoulder line, faithful and solid, became her world. She eased her speed down a few miles per hour, fingers light but firm on the wheel. The Peterbilt responded without complaint. The load was balanced, the trailer steady at her back. The first set of tail lights appeared out of nowhere, two faint red dots floating at the far end of her visibility. They were small at first, like the eyes of some cautious animal paused ahead. As she gradually closed the distance between them, they grew into familiar shapes, the rectangular glow of a trailer's rear lights, the soft glitter of side markers on aluminum. Evelyn felt a small, unexpected sense of relief. Another truck, another human mind out here in the fog, the company of someone else tracing the same thin line through the whiteness. She eased back a bit more to maintain a generous following distance. The red lights ahead bobbed gently, then settled into a steady rhythm matching the lay of the pavement. Now and then, the silhouette of the trailer resolved faintly, high, boxy, with the indistinct suggestion of faded lettering along its side that the fog refused to clarify. She flipped her CB over to Channel 19, thumb brushing the worn numbers by habit. Northbound on 61, you got a Peterbilt sliding in behind you in the mist, she said, voice low. Nice to see somebody's out here besides me. Static answered first, a soft rush like distant surf. Then a click, then a voice, male, warm, with the faintest trace of a drawl older than most of the drivers she usually ran with. Well now, the voice said, ain't you a sight for sore eyes northbound? Welcome to the parade. She smiled without fully meaning to. Parade? She asked, glancing at the indistinct bulk of the trailer ahead. Seems a little thin for that. Thought it was just you. There was a pause. She heard the faint background noise of a cab not her own, the rattle of a loose panel, a radio playing something low and tinny. Give it a mile, the voice said. Fog likes to show you the rest of us up here. As if on cue, additional points of red appeared ahead, further out in the fog, like distant stars blooming into view as one's eyes adjusted. A second set of tail lights. A third, tiny sparks at first, then gradually resolving into shapes as Evelyn's truck ate up the distance between. One after another, trucks materialized. A tanker with a long, rounded shadow, a flatbed with a distinctive profile, a shorter, older-looking box truck with a slightly crooked rear bumper. Each floated in the gray for a while before settling into a lane, their own crews set, their own drivers hidden inside. Their side markers glowed in the mist. Their faded safety stickers and company names were smudged by the haze into pale ghosts of paint and plastic. In her driver's side mirror, when the fog thinned for a second, she caught sight of yet more headlights behind, dimmed out of courtesy. A slow-moving constellation was forming, a convoy threaded along Route 61, visible only within a narrow band of visibility, disappearing from sight both ahead and behind into the same soft nothingness. The CB came alive. You see the way that fog's laying out over the river bottoms. Haven't seen it sit like that since '89, I swear. Any of y'all catch that game last week? Cards are gonna give me a heart attack one of these days. Don't much like running this stretch at night, but she's cleaner traffic-wise. Fog's a trade, I guess. The handles they used sounded like something out of a radio show from another era. Cornhusker, Tin Lizzie, Jawbone. Some called each other by first names that had fallen out of fashion. The slang, too, had a slightly antique ring to it, turns of phrase Evelyn had heard older drivers use in rest-stop stories but rarely encountered over the air these days. She adjusted the squelch, the knob small and familiar under her fingertips. "This is northbound Ruby," she said into the mic, using her own handle. "Appreciate the company, folks. Didn't know there was a parade scheduled tonight." A chuckle rolled back through the speaker. No one person's laugh distinct from another, just an undercurrent of amused sound. "Fog brings out the regulars," the man who had first spoken answered. "Good nights, bad nights. Either way, we tend to find each other along the 88 to 92 stretch. Special kind of weather there." Evelyn glanced at the tiny mile marker number on the GPS screen. 77. "How far you all running up?" she asked. A different voice answered, this time higher, with a trace of the upper Midwest in it. "Most of us top out 4 hardens," it said. "Some peel off at the hollow, some keep on. Depends what they're looking to remember, I guess." That phrasing caught at some small corner of her attention. The hollow, remember, words with the weight of being worn down by use. "Fog Hollow Bridge," another voice chimed in, female wry. "Don't mind them, Ruby, they like to spook the new folks. It's just a low spot over the creek. Gets thick some nights. Keep your lines and you'll be fine." Fog Hollow. The name etched itself into her awareness like frost on glass. The trucks ahead rolled on, red lights bobbing gently, the fog pouring around and between them like slow water. The sense of being part of something grew, a moving pocket of humanity insulated from the wider sleeping world by weather and distance. Evelyn felt some of the loneliness that had been clinging to her shoulders slip away. Convoys had a way of doing that. No faces, no real contact, but a shared pace, shared vigilance. Someone else's engine note out there, someone else's attention scanning the same murky stretch for deer, stalled cars, surprises. The clock on the dash blinked over to 2:20 a.m. The green sign for Hardin's Cross should have been a vague smear in the fog out ahead by now. According to her mental map, she knew roughly where it stood. A quarter mile east of a lonely gas station, 3/4 before a rusted-out billboard advertising a motel that had burned down years ago. What emerged instead, looming up out of the whiteness on the right, was a smaller, older-looking sign. The reflective surface was duller, the lettering in a different font than the modern highway markers. "Fog Hollow 5 miles. Use caution." The arrow pointed straight ahead, along the existing road. Her eyes flicked to the GPS. Its simple digital map still showed a smooth, featureless line. No mark for Fog Hollow. No bridge icon. Hardin's Cross was there, though 30 miles up according to the zoomed-out view, the small dot of its name unwavering. "Thought Hardin was my next landmark," she said lightly into the CB. "Didn't see Fog Hollow on any of my charts." "Hardin'll be there after," came the original man's voice. "Hollow sits between. It comes and goes." "Like the fog," someone else put in. The chuckles that followed had no malice in them. They sounded like the easy teasing of people very used to each other's stories. She watched the mile markers through the fog, though each one revealed itself only in the last possible moment, numbers flashing back at her before disappearing behind. 81, 82, 83. The convoy moved with a measured patience, as if they all knew the exact tempo the fog required. No one surged ahead. No one lagged. The red lights rose and fell with the gentle undulations of the land. In her mirrors, when the mist shifted just so, she caught glimpses of the cabs behind her. One, then another. Rounded noses. Boxier, older models. Shapes more common a decade or two ago than now. Their headlights were yellower, somehow softer than the clear white beams of her own rig. She told herself it was just the distortion of fog. Old halogens, maybe. Lens covers fogged or aged. Another sign appeared on the right, smaller still, half swallowed in whiteness. Fog Hollow 1 mile. No passing. No stopping ON Bridge. The words pulled at something low in her belly, not fear exactly, but a quiet, instinctive tightening. Bridges and fog together had a way of amplifying each other, of taking the solitude of the road and stretching it out over empty space. The road dipped almost imperceptibly. The fog above seemed to thicken, drawing itself closer to the ground, sealing off what little impression she had of open air. The sound of the engine changed in her ears, the noise of the tires on the pavement gaining a subtle, hollow undertone. The first truck's tail lights, ever her point of reference, tilted downward a fraction, then leveled as the road began to cross whatever lay below. The bridge was not dramatic. Its railings, glimpsed to either side, were low concrete walls stained dark with age and moisture. A single, older-style sodium lamp on a tall pole at the midpoint cast a narrow cone of dull amber down onto the surface. The creek, or river as some insisted on calling it, was invisible beyond the edges of the span, hidden in the dense white that glowed faintly with the reflection of her own lights. As she rolled onto the bridge, the CB gave a little pop. Static flared, then softened, then filled her cab with overlapping voices, as if every conversation that had ever been carried on near this spot were trying to be heard at once. "You see it, tail lights just disappeared, man. Fog rolled in so fast I swear it was clear 10 seconds ago. Easy now, keep her straight, you got it. Just a little bump on the left there." Underneath those, more distant still, fragments surfaced like old memories. "Missed the turnoff for the hollow again, can you believe? Lost my first rig out here, back when they still patched the cracks by hand." None of it sharpened into a full scene, into a single narrative. It was a tapestry of sound, threads of past nights woven through the present one. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the wheel. The bridge joints thumped under her tires at regular intervals. Her headlights showed only the pale road surface and the suggestion of low walls. The red tail lights ahead glowed steadily. In the mirror, something changed. For a moment in the convex glass, she saw not just the truck directly behind her, but another set of lights occupying the same space, overlapping. 2 trucks in one lane, one slightly lonelier, one slightly newer. One had a worn logo on its door she almost recognized from old photographs, her father's company colors, from when she had been small and the truck had looked impossibly large in the yard. The overlapping image lasted less than a second, a breath, a blink. Then the mirror showed only the convoy as it was now. Her heart thudded once hard. The bridge under her hummed softly as if responding. "Got a question for you, Ruby," came the original man's voice, gentle but intent now. "That reefer on your back, is it the first time you've pulled north solo on this stretch?" The question should have been impossible. There was nothing about her trailer, from the outside, that revealed anything about how many times she had run any given route, who might have sat in her passenger seat, who might have stood on the catwalk checking hookups while she watched from the ground. "This year," she said, after a pause, "ran it with my old man more times than I can count before that." The static crackled softly, like a thoughtful hum. "Thought so," he replied. "You got his way of holding the lane on the hollow, little right-hand bias. He used to cuss this fog 6 ways from Sunday, but he always came through it." The hair along the back of her neck prickled. The way she favored the right of the lane was not something she had ever consciously chosen. It was just how the wheel felt best in her hands on narrow bridges, how she'd learned to leave a whisper of extra space between herself and the oncoming lane. She swallowed, tasting coffee that had gone bitter with cooling. "You knew him?" she asked, keeping her voice even. "Ran with him some," the man said. "Back when 70 miles an hour seemed like flying and the rest stops still had pay phones lined up on the walls. Good driver, careful, took care of his rigs, talked about you a lot." The bridge lamp passed overhead. A bright flash through the fog, then slid behind. The road beneath her leveled, then began to rise gently. The concrete railings gave way to open shoulders again. The hollow, resonant quality of the sound under the truck faded. The fog did not lift immediately, but it loosened. She could see a little further down the road. The white tunnel lengthened, its walls less dense. The CB's chorus of overlapping voices thinned with it. One by one, the stray fragments fell away, until only the usual low hiss remained, with perhaps the faint hum of a distant engine. "Appreciate you ridden with us through the hollow, Ruby," the man's voice said, quieter now, as if moving a little farther away with each word. "Keep to your lines, watch your markers. Road'll treat you decent if you do." She wanted to ask a dozen questions. Names, dates, how he could possibly recognize the way she held a steering wheel in the dark in the fog after all these years. But when she pressed the transmit button, the speaker responded with nothing but static. The red tail lights ahead began, one by one, to dim and then vanish. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic wink out. It was more like watching lights recede over a hill, only there was no slope, no crest for them to disappear behind. They just melted into the thinning fog, their glow dissolving into the general whiteness until there was no longer any distinct source. Within another mile, the highway ahead of her was empty. The mirrors showed only her own trailer, her own marker lights burnishing the gray. The green sign for Hardin's Cross emerged from the fog on the right, perfectly ordinary in its font and reflectivity. Hardin's Cross, 20 miles. The GPS agreed. Evelyn drove on. The clock ticked over to 2:34 a.m. At the small, all-night truck stop outside Hardin's, where the pump stood in a line under a buzzing canopy, and the coffee inside was always 3 hours old, she parked long enough to stretch her legs and top off her thermos. The air there was clearer, the fog hanging only in low patches around the edge of the lot. Inside, the worn counter was tended by a man with a belly that strained his shirt and a beard that had once been more red than gray. Taped to the wall behind him, among the usual notices about truck wash services and local mechanics, hung a framed newspaper clipping, its edges browned, its text faded. Something in the grainy black and white photograph caught the corner of her eye, a line of trucks along a fog-shrouded stretch of road, headlights glowing faintly, emergency vehicles in the background, their lights overexposed into white smears by the camera. Above the photo, the headline read, 20 truck pileup averted ON Fog Hollow Bridge. No, serious, INJURIS. She stepped closer. The date at the top of the clipping was nearly 20 years ago. The caption under the photograph mentioned a convoy that had eased to a coordinated stop on the bridge when visibility dropped to almost nothing, avoiding what could have been a catastrophic accident. Several drivers were named. One of the handles in quotes, in parentheses beside a real name, was the one she had heard on the CB. Old-timers like to point at that one, the man behind the counter said, noticing her interest. Say it proves prayer works, or that the fog was on their side that night, depending who you ask. Fog Hollow's still there, she asked. Nah, he said. State did some realignment about 10, 12 years back, straightened that stretch out. New bridge other side of the creek. Safer, they say. You still get fog, but it doesn't sit the same. Folks still call the whole low bit the hollow, out of habit. She looked at the photograph again. The trucks were old models now, though they had been current when the picture was taken. One, half caught at the edge of the frame, bore the faint outline of the same company logo that had once decorated the side of her father's rig. Ever hear of an accident there? She asked. Something worse, I mean. Not since that one, the man said. They say before it well, he shrugged, as if unwilling to lend weight to old stories. Fog's funny, people see things, hear things, you know how it is. She did. Back in her cab, with the thermos warm in her hand, and the dash lights a familiar glow, Evelyn sat for a moment in the idling truck and listened to the night. The fog outside seemed thinner here, less insistent. Through the windshield, she could see the highway stretching away under the canopy's edge, its surface a dim ribbon under the sodium lamps. She flicked on the CB, more out of habit than anything. Channel 19 was quiet, save for the occasional weather report and the rustle of distant interference. On a whim she couldn't quite justify, she turned the knob down through the channels, past the usual chatter lanes, into the ones that were often empty. On Channel 6, where older drivers sometimes still went to flex their radios on long, lonely nights, a voice was speaking, its tone easy and conversational. Any of you boys remember that night on the hollow, it said. Fog so thick you could have sworn we weren't touching road at all. Thought for sure we were gonna kiss those rails. Another voice answered, familiar now. Yeah, it said. We had help that night, though. Young eyes behind the wheel, new hands on the wheel these days, too. There was a pause, a crackle, a faint sound that might have been someone clearing their throat. Keep it between the lines, Ruby, the second voice added, so soft it might have been intended only for its own cab. We'll be up ahead if you need us. The static folded over the words gently, tucking them away. Evelyn sat with her hand resting lightly on the mic, not pressing the button, listening to the hiss. Outside, a patch of fog drifted across the lot, dimming the distant streetlight for a moment, then moving on. When she pulled back onto Route 61 a few minutes later, the convoy was gone. The highway was her own again, its white lines gleaming clear in her beams. The fog ahead lay in low ribbons now, no longer a continuous wall. She drove north toward the pale suggestion of dawn, the soft hum of the tires stitching the miles together. Somewhere behind her, in a hollow that had been filled and bridged and renamed, the memory of old tale lights lingered in the mist, waiting for the next night when the fog rose just right, and the road decided it wanted company. Story number 5. The prairie at night looked almost flat from the cab, a dark, unbroken plain under a low sky. In daylight, subtle folds and shallow draws gave it texture. Fence lines cut it into quarters. Windbreaks of trees stood in ragged rows along farmsteads. But under the thin, overcast ceiling and the wash of Malik Turner's headlights, all that detail had melted into suggestion. The horizon was only a darker band where earth met sky. The interstate ran straight through it. A long gray seam in the fabric of the plains. The road's surface shone faintly where tiny beads of moisture clung to it, turning the asphalt into soft velvet. Reflectors in the lane dividers winked back at his lights, regular and reassuring. Inside the Freightliner, it was a separate, floating world. The heater breathed a steady warmth against his legs. The dash was a muted constellation of gauges and LEDs, each needle sitting exactly where it ought to be. An old soft blanket lay folded on the passenger seat, its weight familiar. The faint scent of coffee and road dust and vinyl held the cab together like a thread. Malik shifted in his seat, easing a knot out of one shoulder. The green digits of the dash clock read 1:23 a.m., another 3 hours, maybe a little more, and he'd slide into the warehouse district outside of Fargo with a load of paper goods and a thermos that had long since surrendered any pretense of fresh flavor. The CB hissed quietly on a low volume, a constant background presence. Every so often, a loose thought from another truck would break through, someone commenting on a speed trap, a patch of black ice, a good pie slice at a small-town diner. Tonight, on this northern stretch, even that had thinned. Most of the chatter sat on the bigger east-west routes. Up here, it was mostly sky, road, and the patient hum of his own engine. The fog began almost imperceptibly. At first, it was only a thicker sheen across the pavement in low spots, a kind of shining softness that his headlights found and painted into light. Then it rose in shallow drifts along the sides of the road, pooled in the ditches like pale water. In his beams, it lifted in slow curls, reluctant to be disturbed. He watched it gather. There was something almost deliberate about the way it climbed, like breath condensing on a mirror, a gradual blurring of edges. Fence posts vanished first, then the subtle hint of fields beyond, until the world around the Freightliner tightened into a tunnel of pale gray. Malik let a few miles slip under his tires before he eased off the accelerator by a few pounds. The sensation of speed changed. The engine note dropped slightly. The white lane lines, bright and clean on either side, seemed to lean closer, becoming the only clear declaration in the landscape. The night took on that peculiar quality it only seemed to find on foggy runs. Sounds softened. Distances became untrustworthy. The inside of the cab, lit just enough to see his hands on the wheel, felt more intimate, like a small room moving through another, much larger one. Out of the haze ahead, a rectangle of brighter light appeared, suspended at the edge of his range. As the truck closed the distance, the shape resolved into an overhead electronic sign mounted on a gantry across the interstate. Its amber letters glowed through the moisture beads gathered on its face. Way Station 2, MILES, all trucks. Next right, prepare to stop. Malik frowned reflexively. He knew this stretch of highway, there. Hadn't been a way station marked on his route plan. The last one had been nearly 100 miles back. A tired brick building with a single lane and a scale that thunked under the tires like an old piano. He glanced at the GPS mounted on his dash. The simple digital map showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the thin line of Interstate 29 marching north. No special icons, no pullouts, no way station. Still, the sign was official enough. The gantry was solid steel, the lettering the same dotted amber as any other advisory on the network. A prankster couldn't get that high. Road departments weren't in the habit of installing scale houses in secret. Maybe it was new, so new the updates hadn't caught up yet. The thought didn't quite settle, but there was no arguing with bright instructions hanging over the lane. The fines for blowing past an open station weren't worth courting. 2 miles later, the fog had thickened to the point that the sign announcing the actual exit appeared only a few breaths before he was upon it. Way Station, Fog Ridge. All trucks exit when flashing. The amber lights embedded in the sign's frame were pulsing steadily. The word fog sat oddly in his mind, as if it had been waiting there. He put on his turn signal. The soft tick-tick-tick sounded overly loud in the cab. The Freightliner eased right onto the deceleration lane. The texture of the pavement changed beneath him, the faint vibration of rumble strips thrumming through the steering column. The fog along the ramp was thicker, as if the low ground here had collected it like rain in a basin. The highway fell away to his left into a luminous blankness. To the right, faint, diffused light hinted at something beyond the gray, a canopy of lamps, a low building. The way station revealed itself in pieces. First, the line of tall sodium vapor lights bordering the entrance lanes, their orange glows truncated by mist into pale pillars. Then the silhouette of the canopied scale platform, roof low and rectangular over the concrete. Finally, sitting behind it, the squat bulk of the scale house, its windows rectangles of soft, yellow light against dark siding. For a moment, it could have been any older way station in the country. It had that tired, utilitarian sameness. A cinder block building with too much fluorescent, a parking lane angled to one side where trucks waiting for inspection lined up, the sense of a place that lived perpetually between arrival and departure. Malik rolled down to a crawl, following the painted arrows toward the open scale lane. The fog softened everything, edges bled into one another. In the far lane, another truck, a boxy shape, heavily shadowed, sat idling on the platform. Its side markers glowed faintly. The company stencil on its trailer was just a dark smear in the mist. A mechanical voice, thin and slightly tinny, crackled out of a speaker mounted on a post by the scale approach. Truck on inbound, pull up slowly until the red light turns green. Do not exit your vehicle. The phrasing was standard. The sound, though, carried something slightly off, as if the recording had been made on an old tape and then digitized without cleaning. There was a faint whisper of background hiss. He eased forward, feeling the transition as his steer tires crept onto the scale deck. The red light above the lane glared back through the haze. The Freightliner settled, the springs compressing in a familiar, almost comforting way. The soft whine of the reefer unit hummed behind him, the heartbeat of the load. After a moment, the light blinked green. Truck on scale, hold position, the speaker announced. Wait for instruction. Through the rain-smeared glass of the scale house, silhouettes moved. Someone at a desk, the outline of a chair's back, the edge of a wall-mounted clock. Everything behind the windows looked slightly slowed, like a film played at a fraction of normal speed. Malik watched, breathing a soft mist onto the inside of the windshield that the defroster quickly chased away. A faint printer noise drifted across the damp air, that scratchy rip of perforated paper being torn. The speaker crackled again. Unit 374, you're a little heavy on the drive. Pull around back to the inspection lot. He glanced up, blinked. His unit number, 374, was painted on the side of his cab, true enough. But he hadn't given his plate, hadn't spoken into any intercom. Cameras could read numbers. Computers could match them. Yet the way the voice said it felt personal, as if it had known he would be next to roll across. He feathered the accelerator, rolling off the scale. The fog swallowed the main highway entirely now. Out beyond the pool of station lights, the world was nothing but soft blankness. The route around back was narrower, flanked on one side by a low chain-link fence that disappeared upward into fog, and on the other by a strip of ragged grass and a line of dim yard lamps. Their cones of light fell on gravel and old tire tracks. As he rounded the corner, a larger lot opened up, an uneven rectangle of cracked pavement with faded white lines marking long parking bays. Trucks sat in some of them, hulking shapes in the mist. Their outlines were softened, details obscured, but Malik could make out enough to know they weren't all contemporary. A cab over with a square face and a paint job in sun-faded teal. A long-nosed Peterbilt whose chrome stacks rose into the fog and vanished. A fuel tanker whose company logo, half seen, belonged to a brand that had changed names a decade ago. He pulled into an empty slot where a hand-painted sign on a post simply read inspection. Setting the brake, he let the engine idle, filling the cab with its quiet vibration. For a moment he sat listening. The fog dampened most outside sound. Somewhere a compressor cycled on. An air dryer hissed. A bird, some stubborn night creature in the grass, made a single note and then fell silent. In the rearview mirror, the station building looked older from this angle. The paint on its siding seemed more weathered. A metal staircase clung to one side, its railing glossy with condensation. Malik zipped his jacket, grabbed his log folder by habit, and opened the door. The air that met him was cool and heavy with moisture. Fog curled into the cab for a second, tasting the warm, dry interior before he slid down to the ground. His boots made a soft crunch on the gravel. Above him, the nearest yard light hummed faintly, its bulb wrapped in a halo. The trucks parked in the lot loomed like beached ships, their mass evident even without detail. As he approached the scale house door at the back, he noticed the sign taped to the glass at eye level. All drivers have paper logs and permits ready. Paper logs. The word sat oddly in his mind. The electronic logging device clipped to his dash, its digital screen counting off his hours, seemed suddenly very new, very small. He pushed the door. Inside, the smell hit him first. Stale coffee, printed paper, old carpet, and the faint, metallic tang of dust warmed by electronics. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed in a low, constant way. Their white glow flattened colors made the room feel like a diorama. Two desks sat facing a bank of windows that looked out over the scales. At one of them, a man in a uniform shirt the color of faded navy sat with a clipboard in hand. His hair, under a peaked cap, was thinning and gray. The patches on his shoulders bore the state's emblem, but the design was slightly out of date, the colors less crisp than the ones Malik had seen on newer officers. The other desk held an analog scale display, a big dial with a quivering needle, alongside a computer terminal whose bulky monitor belonged to another decade. The man looked up as Malik stepped in. His eyes went briefly to the window, at the truck out on the lane, then back to Malik's face. 374, he asked. Yes, sir, Malik replied automatically. Bring your log and bills over, please. Malik held up his eld. I've got everything on this, he said. We're all electronic now. The man's gaze flicked to the device, then back to Malik, unruffled. Always good to have a backup, he said mildly. You carrying paper? Malik, more out of ingrained habit than expectation, reached into the pocket behind the driver's seat in his mind. He kept a folded paper logbook there, half out of superstition. The old carbon sheets had seemed like a charm against system crashes. In reality, his hand slid into his jacket pocket and closed around exactly that. The cardboard cover of a partially used logbook, the edges slightly dog-eared. He hadn't remembered putting it there. Yet when he drew it out, the sight of his own handwriting on the last page filled and made it feel as though it had always been where it was. He flipped to the current date. The last line he had filled was from an earlier shift, weeks back. The date on the page in his own blocky script did not match the one he knew from digital readouts and dispatch messages. It was the same month, the same day, but a year different. He swallowed, throat dry, and kept his face neutral as he handed it over with his bill of lading. The inspector, his name tag dulled with age, Reed DKLEIN, took the papers without hurry. He set the log on the desk, adjusted his glasses slightly, and ran a thick finger down the grid lines. Lot of hours under your belt, Klein said conversationally. You run in this corridor regular. Yes, sir, Malik said. North and south mostly. Haven't seen this station open before. Klein made a quiet sound that might have been a chuckle. We open when we're needed, he said, not looking up. Fog brings a lot of weight out of hiding. Folks forget what they're carrying. It sounded like a joke, or a half-formed piece of philosophy. The way he said it made it feel like something he'd said many times. The wall clock above the desks read 1:23. Its second hand ticked smoothly. The digital clock on the computer terminal, glowing pale green, read 1:23 as well. The small, battery-powered clock mounted beside the door near the fire extinguisher also read 1:23. Malik glanced at his watch. 1:38 according to its neat digital numerals. Outside, through the fogged window, a truck rolled slowly across the main scale. It was a cab over, older, the kind Malik had only ever driven in training yards and museums. Its paint was a tired beige. On the side of its trailer was a logo he recognized from photographs in trucking magazines from his father's collection, an outfit that had gone bankrupt before Malik got his CDL. Klein scribbled something on a small, perforated ticket and tore it free with the care of long practice. He stamped it with a round, metal device that clicked loudly in the quiet room, then slid it across the desk. "Here you go," he said. "Axles are fine. Just wanted to take a look at your paperwork. You're clear to go. Take it easy getting back up to speed in this soup." Malik glanced down at the ticket. His truck number was there. His plate. His gross weight exactly as he expected. The date at the top, though, was not one he recognized, not in the sense of context. It bore the same month and day as his eld, the same digits as the wall calendar to the left of the door, but the year printed in the corner could have been pulled from an old pay stub of his father's. It was also a year that hadn't yet arrived. He slipped the ticket into the folder with his bills without comment, his fingers a shade more careful than usual. As he turned to go, another driver stepped in from the fog. The man brushed moisture off the shoulders of a quilted jacket, stomping his boots lightly on the rubber mat. He wore a baseball cap with the frayed logo of a defunct fuel company. His face was one that might have occupied any highway diner, lined by weather and sleep deprivation, eyes set back slightly under the brim. He nodded at Malik, the kind of small greeting that passed between people who shared the road. "Fog's thick tonight," he said. "Feels like the old days." Klein looked up at him, his expression flickering through something almost like fondness. "Old days have a way of sticking," he said. "Got your log, Hank?" The name hit Malik with the dull impact of recognition. His father had run under that handle. Hank Turner, always Hank on the radio, even when the years had piled up. Malik paused with his hand on the door, eyes flicking back, the air in his lungs suddenly tight. The other driver, Hank, set a spiral notebook on the desk, open to a page filled with neat, looping handwriting Malik knew intimately from birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen table. He did not turn enough for Malik to see the full line of his face. The brim of the cap shaded his features. In the fluorescent light, the jacket looked the same brand Malik's father had worn until the cuffs had frayed to threads. Klein flipped the notebook closed. "You're good, Hank," he said. "You know this station better than most. Go on ahead. He's right behind you." There was a moment, a small, fragile thing in the buzzing air, when Malik thought Hank might turn, might meet his eyes. His shoulders shifted as if he would. Then the inspector's phone rang, an old, corded model with a bell that sounded like something from another decade. The sound sliced the moment in half. Hank tipped his cap vaguely in Malik's direction and moved past, out through the door into the fog. The cool, damp air met Malik's face again as he stepped outside. For a second, the fog felt thicker, as if it had surged closer to crowd around the doorway. Hank's form was already a muted silhouette moving away, swallowed almost immediately by the white. Engines idled somewhere in the lot, their notes intermingling. Headlights glowed in diffused circles. A low horn sounded once, not in warning, but in the way some drivers did as a wordless acknowledgement, when passing another on a lonely stretch. Back in the cab, Malik closed the door and sat for a moment in the dim, familiar space. The scale ticket rustled faintly as he slid it more securely into the folder. The dash clock blinked 1:39. The eld agreed. He started the truck moving, the big diesel responding smoothly. The path back to the main lane curved past the line of parked rigs. As he crept by, one by one, the details of those trucks seemed to smear and shift in the fog. An old company logo here, appealing but distinct. A style of mirror mount there, out of production since before he'd started driving. A license plate format his state had retired when he was still in school. The way station building fell away behind him, its lamps fading into the white. The ramp back up to the interstate rose gently. The fog thinned with every few yards of climb, the world beyond gradually reasserting itself. By the time he merged back onto the northbound lanes, the highway was once again only a pale road through a gray night. There was no sign for Fog Ridge on the shoulder. No overhead gantry announced the way station's presence. In his side mirror, the space where it had been a minute ago showed only the vague outline of low ground, hazy in the distance. The GPS map remained untroubled, giving no hint that he had ever left the solid blue line of the interstate. Its log of events listed no detours, no delays. Up ahead, beyond the curve of his lights, a pair of tail lights floated, small and steady. Malik checked his mirrors, signaled, and settled in behind them at a careful distance. As he drew closer, the shape of the truck resolved in the fog. Long hood, familiar dimensions. The company name painted on the back of the trailer door was one he knew intimately, not because he still wore it, but because he had grown up with its logo on coffee mugs and jackets and old keychains. Turner Freight. The paint looked new. The dot numbers were neatly stenciled. The rear of the trailer carried a small sticker in one corner, an old, faded highway safety slogan from a campaign he dimly remembered from childhood. He could not see the driver's face. The mirrors showed only a blur. The cab silhouette was that of an older model, slightly boxier, with a visor that cast deeper shade down over the windshield. His hand drifted toward the CB mic. The plastic was warm from the cab's air when his fingers closed around it. The faint indent of countless other grips lay under his palm. For a moment, he simply held it, listening to the low hiss on Channel 19. Out of that hissing came a voice, so quiet he might have imagined it. Northbound 374, it said, the drawl familiar in a way that tugged at old memories. Roads clear ahead. Get her home safe. The words could have been a thought in his own head, something he'd heard long ago on some other night when fog had wrapped itself around the world and his father's hand had. Rested steady on the wheel beside him. He did not press the transmit button. He didn't have to. The Freightliner settled into the lane, its engine humming, its headlights cutting a clean path through the thinning mist. A mile later, the tail lights of the Turner freight trailer dimmed and then slipped away. As if the other truck had taken an exit Malik had somehow missed seeing, or had simply eased ahead into a stretch of clearer air. When the next set of green signs appeared out of the fog, they listed mileage only. No mention of Fog Ridge. No way station ahead. Later, at a fuel stop near Grand Forks where the clerk's radio played a country song from 30 years ago, and the coffee machine hissed like an old steam vent, Malik asked out of idle curiosity if there was a scale house south of there. The clerk, a woman with a pen tucked into hair pulled up in a quick knot, shook her head. Had one down at Ridge Lane back in the day, she said. Closed it when they put in the new bypass. Must be 15 years gone. Building still there, I think. All boarded up. They use it to store road salt now. No scales running. He nodded, thanked her, and went back out into the cool night. The fog there was a memory only, a faint, ground-hugging whisper along the ditch. In the cab, the scale ticket sat between his bill of lading and his inspection forms, its paper a little stiffer than the others. When he glanced at it again, hours later, in the daylight at the receiver's dock, the date at the top had shifted. It now matched the one on his eld exactly. The inspector's name, D. Klein, was still there, stamped in slightly smudged ink. At the bottom, in a hand that looked not unlike his father's, someone had scrawled, "Fog Ridge clear." The warehouse foreman signed his delivery without comment. The load had arrived on time, intact, no overages, no shorts. Somewhere far south, In a shallow dip in the prairie, the old scale house stood with its windows boarded and its doors chained. On certain nights when the fog rolled just right across the low ground, for a few hours its fluorescence flickered on, the analog needle quivered, and the road tipped some of its passing weight through its narrow, watchful lane. Drivers moved on. Paper tickets slipped into folders. The road kept its own, quieter reckonings. Story number 6. The freight yard at Red Willow was the last familiar landmark before the highway slipped into the more remote stretches of the northern route. After that, it was mostly small towns and long distances between sodium lamps. Lena Park watched its lights fall away in her mirrors as her freightliner climbed the gentle grade north, the world ahead shrinking to the pale cone of her headlights and the faint suggestion of trees on either side. The night was cold enough that the windows had fogged slightly at the corners where the defroster didn't quite reach. The heater pushed a steady stream of warm air around her boots. The dash glowed quietly in green and amber. The low murmur of the engine underfoot felt solid, dependable, as if it alone were holding the dark at bay. She checked the time. 1:11 a.m. The numbers on the dash matched those on her phone, tethered to a power cord on the console. According to the GPS map, she was about 40 miles from a small town her dispatch notes called Lake Haven. Just north of that, she'd been told, was the new Evernight Logistics Hub, an enormous distribution center that had been the subject of yard gossip for months. "You can't miss it," her dispatcher had said earlier, his voice crackling through the line while she'd been waiting at Red Willow. All lit up like a stadium out there in the cornfields. They're running 24/7 now. Drop your empty, pick up a backhaul, and you'll be home by breakfast. They got this whole thing automated. Slick. In the photo he'd forwarded, Evernight had looked almost unreal. Hundreds of bays in a shining row, high walls of white panels lit by banks of floodlights, rows of straight yellow lines on fresh asphalt. It had looked more like a drawing than a place the road could actually lead to. Outside the cab now, the sky was a uniform, low gray, the stars smothered. The trees along the highway were bare silhouettes. Ground fog had begun to gather in the low places, laying thin sheets of white over the ditches and fields. Occasionally, it rose in drifting banks that her headlights pierced only reluctantly, turning their beams into flat panels of diffuse light. Lena watched the fog with a practiced eye. She, grown up on the coast, where sea mist rolled in heavy and sudden, this inland version moved differently, as if it were feeling its way out of the soil rather than dropping from the sky. It thickened in fits and starts, claiming corners of the night. The green sign for Lake Haven emerged from the haze on the right, glistening in her beams. Lake Haven, 5 miles. Next 3 EXITS. Beyond it, no town lights were yet visible, just the same quiet stretch of two-lane divided highway, the same low dark of trees and fields. The CB, turned low, burbled occasionally with distant voices. Most of the chatter was about weather further south, snow on the passes, freezing rain on an east-west interstate. Up here, no one seemed to be saying much of anything. The fog thickened in a way that made the road feel narrower. It rose up from the ditches and covered the shoulders, sliding silently over the asphalt until it pressed right up to the edge of her lane. The guardrails disappeared. Signs emerged only when she was nearly under them. Through that murk, another overhead board materialized, a newer electronic one, its amber letters shimmering with moisture. Evernight Logistics North Hub, Exit 18. Follow blue signs. The name glowed clearly, the letters unexpectedly sharp against the blurred mist. Lena felt a small kick of curiosity. This was the new place then, the hub that had been a rumor, then a photo, then a dot on her dispatch sheet. There should have been construction, articles, talk on the radio. But beyond that picture and a few excited words from drivers who knew someone who'd been there, she'd heard almost nothing. She checked the GPS. A new icon had appeared just beyond Lake Haven, a square with a tiny truck symbol inside. Evernight Logistics, it labeled itself. The map's pale gray road bent slightly toward it via exit 18. The highway bent gently too, though the fog made it feel as if she were turning in place and the world were rotating around the beam of her lights. When the exit ramp appeared, it did so suddenly. A break in the spray of reflectors, the white lines angling off to the right, a blue sign jutting from the ground. EVRNIJHT Logistics, truck entrance. Straight ahead. The arrow pointed not toward Lake Haven proper, but along a frontage road that paralleled the highway into the deeper fog. Lena flicked on her turn signal, the soft ticking as familiar as her own breathing, and guided the Freightliner off the main road. The pavement of the ramp felt new beneath the tires. There was that slight slickness fresh asphalt had when it was damp, the hum of the rubber just a little higher, like plucking a tighter string. At the bottom of the ramp, the world turned more ghostly. The fog here was thicker, wrapping itself around the truck, muting even the engine's steady thrum. The frontage road stretched ahead as a pale ribbon. On either side, the fields were nothing but blank whiteness, as if crops, fences, ditches had all been erased. Small blue signs appeared at intervals along the roadside, their reflective surfaces beading with water. EVRNGHT 2 miles. Trucks only. EVRNGHT 1 mile. Check-in lane 3. Each one looked perfectly ordinary, the kind of wayfinding markers installation crews bolted in place after a new facility opened. Yet beyond their glow there was nothing, a world without edges, only thickness. The headlights picked up a faint glow ahead, low to the ground, diffuse. It grew almost imperceptibly, as if the fog itself were starting to glow from within. The road curved slightly. The glow brightened, turned into multiple points, yard lights perhaps, or floodlights mounted on tall poles. When the Evernight hub finally presented itself, it did so all at once, like a curtain pulled aside. One moment, there was only the narrow frontier of the frontage road and a pale wall of fog. The next, the lights of the facility were there, a vast, orderly array shining up into the low clouds, turning the mist above into a glowing dome. The building was immense, long, low, and white. Dozens, maybe hundreds of loading bays lined its side, their bay numbers stenciled in black on reflective plates. Lines of yellow paint marked lanes across an expanse of asphalt that seemed, in the fog, to stretch out indefinitely. Tall light poles stood at intervals, their fixtures casting pools of cold white brightness. To the right, a sign mounted on a steel frame loomed out of the gray. EVRNIJHT Logistics, North Hub. All drivers proceed to gate. An arrow pointed toward a cluster of smaller lights on the near side of the yard. Beneath the sign, a security arm sat raised, its underside slick with condensation. Lena let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Despite the fog, despite the late hour, something about the place was reassuring. The lights, the order, the clear instructions. After miles of indistinct night, the geometry of the hub felt almost welcoming. She rolled under the open security arm and followed the painted arrows. The road beneath her tires changed from darker asphalt to a lighter, concrete-like surface. Each seam in the slab made a faint thump as she passed over it, a tiny rhythm under the deeper hum. Ahead, 3 wide lanes spread out in front of a sort of covered gatehouse. Above them, electronic signs hung, each displaying different messages. Lane 1, appointments. Lane 2, live LOADS. Lane 3, drop/hook. Her dispatch sheet specified a drop and hook. She guided the Freightliner into the 3rd lane, aligning her cab with the glowing number 3 overhead. As she came to a stop under the canopy, a soft chime sounded, as if triggered by her arrival. A small, glass-fronted kiosk stood to one side of the lane, screen glowing pale blue behind a layer of fog droplets. Check-in tap screen. It read in neat white letters. She set the brake, made sure the truck was in neutral, and rolled the window down partway. Cold, Damp air pushed its way into the cab, bringing with it the smells of wet concrete, diesel, and something else she couldn't quite place. A faint, clean scent like new cardboard and plastic wrap. The screen in the kiosk brightened as she leaned toward it, sensing motion. A prompt appeared. Enter driver ID. She tapped in the string of numbers she used at most major facilities, fingers leaving tiny ovals in the condensation on the glass. Another prompt blinked up almost immediately. Welcome Lena Park. Dock assignment 47B. Current trailer VRFID. Drop in Lot C, Row 5. Pick up preloaded trailer ID EV3091. Follow blue lane markings. She blinked. No one had asked for her bill of lading. No one had scanned a barcode. Yet the system had her name, her current trailer number, and assigned dock, a preloaded outbound ID. The fog beaded and slowly slid down the kiosk's glass, leaving brief, clear trails. The screen's glow made the droplets look like tiny, moving stars. A voice, female and softly modulated, came through a hidden speaker in the kiosk. Driver Lena Park, it said. Proceed forward and follow the blue lane. An attendant will be available if you require assistance. The tone was neutral, friendly without warmth. There was the faintest echo on it, as if played in a large, empty room. She looked around. In all the bright expanse of the yard, she saw only a few other trucks. One was backing into a far-off bay, its reverse beeper a distant, rhythmic chirp. Another sat in a drop lot, engine off, its windows opaque under the lights. No figures moved across the concrete. No forklifts buzzed. No yard dogs flitted between rows like busy insects. Yet the building itself glowed alive. Rows of high windows along the upper wall shining with white light. The sense of interior activity was implied, if not visible. She rolled forward, the kiosk receding into the fog behind her. The overhead canopy gave way to open yard again. Blue lines, painted freshly onto the concrete, curved away from the gate in a clear path. She followed them. As she eased the truck along, she became aware of a subtle sound she hadn't registered at first, a low, constant whir, as if dozens of distant fans or conveyor belts were running inside the building. It was too even to be individual engines, too continuous to be intermittent machinery. It was like the hum of a vast, sleeping thing. Lot C lay off to the right, according to the yard signs that loomed up through the fog. Rows of trailers stood in neat grids there, each one with a small reflective marker on its nose. Her assigned row, number 5, appeared after a moment, its painted designation shining weakly in the damp. She threaded the Freightliner between rows until she found a slot marked drop, 47B with the practiced motions of muscle memory. She set up her angle, eased the truck back, watched the trailer swing gently into place. The fog made distance feel tricky, but the feel of the fifth wheel under tension, the slight give when the landing gear touched down, were more reliable than sight. Once unhooked, she tugged forward and parked for a moment at the end of the lane. The outbound trailer she needed, EV3091, should be somewhere close, its ID on a small panel, its bulk solid and waiting. She scanned the row ahead. The silhouettes of trailers loomed in the gray, their corners softened, their numbers catching bits of light. Her breath made small puffs in the cab air, where the window was cracked. There, EV3091. The numerals were stark against the metal, unworn, as if no weather had yet had a chance to dull them. A faint light glowed from a small indicator near the landing gear, a soft green LED like the eye of some quiet device. She pulled alongside, lined up, backed under. The satisfying clunk of the kingpin seating in the fifth wheel rang up through the cab. The trailer's weight settled behind her, changing the way the suspension rode, the note of the tires. Climbing down to crank up the landing gear, she could feel the fog on her face, cold and fine, beating on her eyelashes. The concrete underfoot was smooth, almost too smooth, like a warehouse floor that had only just seen its first scuffs. As she moved, motion sensors picked her up. Lights above the lane brightened a fraction following her steps. Somewhere, an unseen camera whirred softly, repositioning. The paperwork envelope hanging in its plastic pouch on the trailer's nose was dry, despite the damp air. Inside were bills stamped with the Evernight logo, an abstract, looping shape around a stylized E, and her own company's name neatly printed. The route information matched her dispatch. The dates were correct. Only the time gave her pause. The pickup time printed at the top was 1:15 a.m., exactly the time her dash clock had shown when she'd first seen the Lake Haven sign. She glanced at her watch. 2:03 a.m. The minutes between check-in, drop, and hook stretched in her mind as longer than that, filled as they had been with careful maneuvers, small details. Yet here was paper asserting a different version. Inside the cab again, with the new trailer snug behind her, she checked the mirror angles, flipped through her digital messages. No new notifications. No corrections. Her outbound load lay in tidy rows in the reefer's quiet belly, a neat set of pallets bound for another distribution center closer to home. As she pulled back toward the main gate, the fog seemed to thin in patches, then thicken again, as if breathing. The broad side of the Evernight building loomed to her left, white panels gleaming under banks of lights. For a moment, one of the high windows showed a shadow passing behind its bright square, some figure on an interior mezzanine, moving between unseen aisles. The voice from the kiosk, softer now, came again through a speaker somewhere above the exit. "Outbound EV 3091, it said. "Proceed to exit. Thank you for choosing Evernight Logistics." The phrase struck her as odd. Customers chose carriers. Carriers chose hubs when contracts demanded. Yet the wording sat there in the air, calm and precise. The security arm at the exit was already open. The blue lines on the pavement guided her back to the frontage road in a smooth, looping curve. As her steer tires crossed the threshold between yard concrete and road asphalt, the sound around her changed. The low, constant whir faded. The hum of her own engine became more prominent. The fog at the edge of the facility was a hard line. One moment she was within the glowing dome of Evernight's lights, and the next she was back in the softer, more natural haze of the open fields. In her mirrors, the first few rows of bay doors receded quickly into the gray. The glow of the yard lights dimmed with distance, then were gone, swallowed in the same way towns sometimes were when dawn hadn't yet decided to lift the sky. The drive back to the interstate felt shorter than the approach. Blue signs appeared, then the ramp, then the comforting breadth of the main lanes. The traffic was as light as before. A lone sedan passed, its headlights twin comets in the mist for a brief moment. By the time the highway straightened fully again, the fog had begun to break in places, revealing a low smear of lighter sky off to the east where dawn would eventually push its way in. Farmhouses flickered into view now and then, their porch lights warm and yellow in the black fields. Lena checked the clock, 1:23 a.m. She frowned, more in puzzlement than concern. Her phone's display, when she thumbed it awake, showed the same digits. Her watch agreed. All three devices matched, as if the time between Red Willow and this stretch beyond Lake Haven had folded oddly, compressing itself into a loop. Hours later, when the sun had risen fully and the fog had burned off, she would mention Evernight casually at a fuel island, her conversation overlapping with the hiss of diesel and the clank of metal nozzles. "You run that new hub north of Lake Haven yet?" she'd ask another driver, a man in a ball cap stenciled with the logo of a well-known carrier. "Evernight Logistics." He would squint, drag a rag across his hands, and shake his head. "Construction, been stalled on that for months," he'd say. "Supposed to be some huge thing, but last I heard it's just footings and rebar. No way it's open yet. You sure you went all the way out there? Fog plays tricks out on those frontage roads." She'd show him the paperwork, Evernight's logo, the neat type, the time stamp. He'd raise his eyebrows, whistle under his breath, and hand it back. "Looks fancy," he'd say. "Maybe they're testing systems, soft launch or something. Wouldn't surprise me if dispatch knows before the news does." At her home terminal, weeks later, while filing trip envelopes into cabinets with fluorescent labels, she'd mentioned the hub to a dispatcher who knew all the local gossip. "Evernight," the dispatcher would say. "They broke ground, sure, but the last storm knocked half their framing down. They're months behind. No freight moving out of there yet." She'd tap keys, frown. "You sure that's where this came from?" She'd nod at Lena's paperwork. The facility ID in the system would list some anonymous warehouse in another state, a stand-in code used when things hadn't yet been properly entered. Out on the northern highway, on certain foggy nights when the time sat oddly on the dash, and the fields were more suggestion than substance, drivers with drop hooks and tight schedules would see blue signs in the haze. EVRNIGHT Logistics straight ahead. A shining hub would bloom out of the gray for them alone, its bays open, its systems ready, its paperwork precise. Loads that needed moving would be waiting, as if pulled from somewhere in the long, restless chain of freight that circled the country. The trucks would enter, roll through, hook, and leave. The clocks on their dashboards would blink a little, the minutes around their visits smoothing themselves into the hours of the run. The runs would be logged. The freight would arrive. And somewhere behind walls of bright white panels and long rows of doors, in a place that existed more surely in fog than in clear daylight, a system would hum on, quietly balancing weights and distances, drawing weary drivers in when the night and the road and the schedule all aligned just so. Story number 7. By the time Shay Mercer left the last town's yellow glow in her mirrors, the land had already begun to tilt. Out here, north of the wheat fields and long past the last big box store, the highway shouldered its way into the foothills, winding toward a low pass between darker shapes of mountains. Pines clustered closer to the asphalt. The air through the cracked window smelled different, cleaner, sharper, edged with cold stone and sap. Her Freightliner moved steadily under her hands, a quiet, determined presence in the dark. Inside the cab, the world was small and warm. Dash lights in soft greens and oranges, the low, constant rush of the heater, the rattle of a pen in the cup holder, the faint hum of her phone charging by the shifter. A thermos sat half empty in its cradle, the coffee inside long since cooled, its scent weaving through the air beneath the stronger smell of diesel and vinyl. The dash clock read 12:38. She left the truck stop at Silver Flats a little after 11, topped off with fuel, a stale donut, and the kind of advice old drivers liked to give when they saw a younger one studying a map near a mountain pass. "Fog'll come down at Whitecap this time of year," a man in an oil-stained cap had said, nodding at the weather screen over the coffee machines. "You feel it thickening up. You mind your speed and stay off the brakes on that S-curve. Don't chase nobody's taillights. They'll lead you places you don't want to be." On the wall behind him, above the display of CB antennas and chrome polish, a framed photo had hung, taken decades ago, by the look of it. Trucks lined a narrow two-lane ribbon of road, fog curling around their bumpers, pine trees ghosted behind the whiteness. The caption in crooked marker under the glass had read, "White CAP Ridge Night Shift." Now, as Shay watched the land rise in gentle curves beyond the hood, the memory of that photo came back with uncomfortable clarity. The fog started the way it often did, a low gauze in the ditches, thin skeins across the fields. Her headlights found it and made it glow, turning the humble patches into something otherworldly. Mile markers slid by on the right, their reflective faces sparkling briefly. 211, 212, 213. The engine's song changed subtly as the grade increased, taking on a slightly deeper note. The tires made a different kind of sound too, a more textured whisper as the road's surface roughened for better traction. The CB sat on channel 19, turned down to a soft hiss. Earlier, drivers had been talking weather and football, but those voices had faded as she climbed away from the main flow of traffic. Up here, there were fewer rigs, more long stretches where the only sounds were her own. The fog climbed with her. It rose out of the low places, spreading from ditch to shoulder, lapping at the white line like a careful tide. It thickened in front of her bumper in delicate veils, then clung, building layer on layer until her high beams only made a brighter wall of gray instead of more distance. The lonely reflectors in the center line turned into floating, pulsing beads, each one appearing in the light and slipping behind her tires in the space of a breath. Shay eased back on the throttle, watching the speedometer drop from 60 to 50, then to 45. The road curved right, the trees pressing closer. Beyond the beams, she could see nothing of the world except fog. No stars, no mountains, no hint of how high the land had risen under her. The green metal sign announcing the start of Whitecap Ridge loomed out of the haze suddenly, too close. She had to lean forward a fraction to read it as it swept past on the shoulder. Whitecap Ridge. ELEV, 4,860. Fog area, next 12 miles. Fog area, she thought, with a small, humorless exhale, as if the fog politely confined itself to certain boundaries. The CB hissed. A fragment of someone's voice broke through and shattered against the static. Ridge is soup tonight, then dissolved. Shay flipped the volume up a notch. Anybody else up on Whitecap northbound? She asked, keeping her tone neutral, reasonable. Visibility not doing me any favors. For a long couple of seconds, there was nothing but the familiar soft roar of the open channel. Then a different kind of silence settled, the kind that was almost a listening. A small light on her CB that she'd never paid much attention to before glowed faintly. It sat just below the channel numbers, a tiny, recessed LED-labeled moan. Without fully intending to, she turned the channel knob down one click. The digital display, usually a simple green 19, flicked to 18, then to 00. Then, for a breath, to just a pale, looping symbol she didn't recognize. 2 concentric circles with a line through them, before resolving into CH. Her thumb hesitated over the mic. The channel readout stayed where it was. The moan light brightened a shade. Static still filled the speaker, but it had changed. It was softer, thinner, as if the noise of the world had been turned down. Underneath, she could hear something. Not quite voices, not quite anything she could name, just a sense of presence like sound waiting to be shaped. Whitecap Night Channel, a voice said very quietly. It was neither male nor female in any obvious way. It had that compressed quality that came from being carried over wire and airwaves for a long distance, but it was clear, calm. It sounded, not tired exactly, but as if it had been awake a very long time. Shay's skin prickled along the backs of her arms, under her jacket. "You're on the ridge," the voice continued, not in question but in simple statement. "Northbound. Driver ID on your dash says Mercer. Your light on the drive's heavier on the trailer. Fog, about to thicken at the south S-curve. You want a hand?" Her foot hovered just above the accelerator, then eased back, letting the truck lose a few more miles per hour. The dash lights painted her knuckles in green. She looked at the sticker near her right knee without meaning to. It was the fleet's own ID label, laminated and stuck to the lower dash. Mercer, Unit 5821. She hadn't spoken her name. She hadn't given a unit number. Her first instinct was to glance up, to search for cameras, patrol cars, some dot vehicle lurking in a turnout. The fog made that impossible. The world beyond the glass was nothing but glowing white, and the hint of pine trunks flowing past in the corners of her vision. "Who am I talking to?" she asked. Her voice sounded level. She was glad of that. "Call us what you like," the voice said. "Some say Night Dispatch. Some say the Ridge Keeper. Some say it's just the CB picking up its own reflection. Doesn't matter much." You got a steep right-hander ahead in about half a mile. Visibility's going to feel like someone pulled your hat down over your eyes. Stay center in your lane, don't chase the markers on the edge. They're set a little funny here. Follow my count instead. She thought of the photo at the truck stop. The old man's casual warning. Don't chase nobody's taillights. They'll lead you places you don't want to be. The road began to tip a little harder under her tires. The pitch of the engine changed, a low, pleased rumble as it dug into the grade. The fog ahead, impossibly, grew thicker, collapsing into a flat wall only a few truck lengths out. The white lines at the edges of her lane seemed to lean inward, uncertain. Competing instincts tugged at her. One said to distrust anything anomalous, to lean on her own training and nothing else. The other, older and quieter, the one that had been with her since she'd ridden shotgun in her uncle's rig as a kid, reminded her that sometimes you listen to the road in ways you couldn't write into a manual. She drew in a long, slow breath and let it out, fingers adjusting minutely on the wheel. "All right," she said, "counting with you." "Good," the voice replied, and something like approval warmed its tone by half a degree. 3-2 now. The curve arrived exactly on that last word. The road swung right more sharply than the gentle bend she'd expected, its edge nearly lost in the glowing fog. A lesser light, a nervous hand, might easily have drifted too close to the shoulder, chasing the ghost of a line half swallowed in gray. Instead, eyes on the faint herringbone of the center line and the imagined shape of the curve, Shay eased the wheel a little more, trusting the voice's unseen vantage, trusting the picture of the road she'd built in her head from maps and stories. "Hold it steady," the voice murmured, as if speaking more to the truck than to her. Outside, the Freightliner's trailer followed, that great obedient weight pivoting gently. Tires hissed on damp pavement. The world beyond the glass was nothing but motionless light and the faint dark suggestion of trunks. "You're clear," the voice said a second later. "Straight stretch for about a mile. You'll think you should have seen the runaway ramp on your left by now. You haven't. Fog bends light weird in this dip. Keep her under 40. You've got company behind you and ahead." "Company?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Check your mirrors," it said. She did. In the left side glass at the edge of her own trailer's red marker lights, too faint, far-off headlights glowed in the fog, small as marbles. In the right mirror, something more unnerving, the suggestion of tail lights ahead, much farther than she could see through the windshield. 2 pinpricks of red ghosted in the haze. "They're on their own miles," the voice said, as if sensing the thought. "Different nights, different years, passing through the same piece of road. The ridge remembers. We can all use each other's tracks now and then. That's all this is." The idea sat in her mind like a weight set on still water, creating slow rings. Other nights, other drivers. Their cautious wheels wearing the same faint path into the asphalt. One fog-swelled hour after another. All of them layered in some way only this high, cloud-wrapped stretch could feel. She listened. The CB was no longer just static. Under the main voice were murmurs like conversations in a distant room behind a closed door. Bursts of laughter, half warnings. Someone cursing gently at a missed gear. A woman humming tunelessly under her breath. They wove together into a kind of low tapestry. "Left hand kink coming," the voice said. "Half mile, then a false summit. Don't let the breadcrumb of the sky on your right convince you you're over it. There's one more drop." "How do you know this road that well?" Shay asked, not to challenge, but because the question needed asking. There was a small pause, as if the voice were considering how much to offer. "Been riding it a long time," it said. "We get pieces, tires through fog, breaths held on corners. Things people said out loud when they thought they were alone. It adds up. Road like that, you know." She did, in a way. The small town turns where locals took an extra half foot of the center line out of habit. The spot on an otherwise straight freeway where everyone's brake lights tapped, for no visible reason, because once long ago, Something had happened there that made it into a caution in the communal bloodstream. "You one of the old-timers?" she asked, half smiling despite herself. "Get stuck up here after hours and decided not to leave?" There was the faintest echo of something like a chuckle on the line. "Old is one word for it," the voice said. "But you know us too, Shay. In a way, you've been talking to bits of us since you first held a mic. The road listens. Sometimes it answers. Tonight it's answering in a way you can hear." The left-hand kink came and went under her tires, gentler than the right-hander had been. The fog shifted subtly, pressing harder on the windshield, then easing. Her wipers squeaked once, a small, tired sound. Through it all, her speedometer hovered in the mid-30s. Her hands were relaxed on the wheel in that precise way that meant tension lived somewhere deeper, in the muscles alongside her spine and between her shoulder blades. "Other side of the false summit," the voice said softly. "You're going to see a set of hazards blinking on the shoulder. Don't swing wide. It's not tonight. It's somebody else's memory, but don't ignore it either. Let it remind you to stay off the Jake on the ice patch just past, even if there's no ice." Even if there's no ice. The road lifted under the truck, the engine note softening as the grade tipped over. For a brief, almost exhilarating second, the fog above thinned just enough that she could see the underside of the low cloud deck, a smeared, luminous ceiling. Then it swooped back down, thick and enveloping. Just ahead and to the right, amber blinkers pulsed faintly in the white. Hazards, exactly where the voice had said, floating in the fog like the beating lights of some slow-moving insect. Her instinct, seeing they were so close to the lane, was to edge left, to give room to some stranded rig hidden in the whiteness. "Hold your line," the voice said, sudden and firm. "Trust the stripe. He's not here tonight, just what's left of him." She kept her shoulders square with the seat, her eyes on the faint scallops of the center line. The blinking hazards drifted past her passenger window, close enough that she almost felt she could have reached out and touched them. There was no shape behind them, no silhouette of a vehicle, just light in fog. Under her front tires, the pavement changed texture for a few yards, a slick, almost greasy feel, as if a thin, invisible skin lay over the asphalt. It wasn't ice. The temperature gauge on the dash sat a few degrees above freezing, but it carried the same treacherous quality. Her right foot hovered. Years of training, of winter runs, shouted about gentle inputs, no sudden changes. She let the truck coast, the engine braking doing the work without her adding to it. "Good," the voice murmured. "That's how he should have done it." "Did he?" she asked quietly. "Not the first time," the voice said. "The ridge learned. So did everyone who heard about it. Some never made it past that patch. Some did with shaking hands. All of it's in the concrete one way or another. You're just picking up the signal." The idea that the road itself might carry such imprints didn't feel altogether impossible out here, where fog blurred the boundary between the seen and the sensed, between the white lines and the stories that clung to them. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The Freightliner flowed along the grade, through turns that had been steep enough to earn rumors but were, under careful hands and low speed, merely serious. The fog's density shifted in vague, restless patterns. Sometimes it was so thick that the hood seemed to vanish. Sometimes it thinned just enough to reveal the suggestion of a rock face, glistening with beads of moisture, or the dark uprights of guardrail posts marching along the edge. Other voices occasionally brushed the edges of channel, a woman reciting town names like a litany under her breath, a man pleading, half laughing with his rig to just hold together through this last load, old girl, then we'll rest. Someone whispering a song off-key. None of it was sharp or clear, just little ripples. "How far's the top?" Shay asked eventually. Her palms had begun to feel damp against the wheel. "You're closer to the down ramp than the up now," the night dispatch voice said. "Less than 2 miles. Fog will pretend to thin at the crest and then slap you one more time on the north slope. That's just its way. Save a little attention for that. After the second runaway ramp, you're back in your own weather." Back in my own weather, she echoed, liking the phrase for reasons she couldn't quite name. On her right, through a brief parting in the whiteness, something appeared that made her breath catch. A turnout, paved but narrow, with an old wooden sign half tilted at its entrance. In her headlights, limited reach, she glimpsed only the top half of the words carved into it. White CAP viewpoint. No view tonight. Only a thicker swirl of fog in the turnout's mouth, glowing in the truck's wash like smoke. For a fraction of a second as she passed, she thought she saw trucks parked there, just shapes, dim and stationary. A couple of grain haulers, a tanker, a rig with a cab-over profile. Marker lights off, windows dark. They looked as if they'd been there a very long time, waiting for something that never quite arrived. She blinked. The turnout slid away behind her. In the mirror, there was only fog. The old-timers like to say they'll meet at the viewpoint one of these nights, the voice remarked, as if following her gaze. Have coffee all at once, trade stories proper. Until then, they stop in their own ways, some more than others. You one of them, she asked. Stop there, I mean. We've stopped in a lot of places, it said. Viewpoints, rest areas, shoulders. Sometimes we stop for good. Sometimes just long enough to catch our breath. Sometimes we forget which is which. The grade eased beneath her tires. The incline's pressure against the cab shifted, the way it always did when a long climb surrendered at last to flatter ground. The fog above seemed to lift by a degree, as if granting a little more air. The dash clock clicked over to 12:52. Okay, the voice said quietly. Little drop, then you're off the ridge proper. One more squeeze of fog, don't let it trick you into thinking you're still climbing. Trust your instruments, trust your hands. You've done good. The compliment was unexpected. It landed somewhere low in her chest, gentle and steadying. The road tipped downward. Not sharply, just enough that she could feel the Freightliner's weight lean into the harness of gravity. She downshifted once, then let the engine hold her speed, foot light. The fog did as promised, thickened suddenly, almost petulantly, turning her windshield into a glowing sheet. Her own breath sounded loud in the cab. The wipers squeaked, the engine hummed. Straight, now an easy right, the voice murmured. You'll see the sign about halfway through. Don't reach for it, let it come to you. The sign arrived like a revelation. Through the white, green letters formed at the edge of her visibility, wet and bright. White CAP Ridge, North Summit. ELEV, 4,830. She rolled past it, feeling a looseness she hadn't realized had been missing seep back into her shoulders. The curve softened. The sensation of dropping gentled to a drift. You're off our back, the voice said. Fog's going to thin in about a mile. You'll get some stars back. Maybe the glow from the mill in Dry Creek if the wind's right. After that, it's just you, your logbook, and the usual miles. Just like that, she asked, half wanting to keep the unseen company a little longer now that the worst was past. Just like that, it said. You won't find this channel once you're down. Don't worry about twisting the knob. It's only here when the ridge calls for it. Been that way as long as anyone can remember. Might be this is the only time you and I talk. Might not. Depends how the miles stack. How do I? She searched for the right phrase. How do I thank you? You'll do it without knowing, the voice replied, its edges already fatting slightly as if moving farther away. Some night, some year, you'll be the one on a mic talking a rookie through some fog patch 30 states from here. You'll say something somebody once said to you. You'll slow when you need to, and someone behind you will slow because you did. That's all this is. Just keep it between the lines. The static around the words thickened, wrapping them. The faint murmurs of other voices rose for a moment. A laugh, a curse, a sigh, a murmur of thanks in a language she didn't know, then sank. Shay looked down at the CB. The channel display now showed a simple 19 again. The little moan light was dark. Her thumb hovered near the knob, then moved away. Whatever odd route she'd taken to reach channel 0 seemed less like something she'd done and more like something the radio had allowed. Outside, the fog loosened. First, she could see the tops of the roadside posts again, their rectangles shining in her beams. Then the faint texture of the rock face on her left. Then, like slow curtains drawing back, the sky reappeared, low clouds still but thinner, with a few stars punching through in paler points. In the right-hand distance, where the valley flattened, the sodium-yellow bubble of Dry Creek's paper mill glowed against the darker land, a small artificial sunrise. The road straightened. Her speed crept back up to 45, then 50. Her hands, without her prompting, eased their grip on the wheel to a more casual posture. She realized with a small start that she was humming, a tune with no words, half remembered, something her uncle had used to whistle when driving through weather he didn't entirely trust. The rest of the night rolled out in calmer miles. Truck stops came and went. Signs announced towns. The fog lay only in low ditches now, a reminder rather than a force. At a diner 2 days later, a narrow place squeezed between a feed store and a laundromat along a different stretch of highway. Shay found herself at a counter next to a man with a thick mustache and a faded white cap ridge patch sewn onto his jacket sleeve. "You run the ridge much?" he asked, nodding at her cap with her company logo. "Fog'll be coming back up there soon." "Hit it last week," she said. "Night run, fog was like cotton. Heard some interesting stuff on the CB." He tipped his coffee mug toward her. "Channel?" he asked, as casually as someone might ask about a truck wash. "Night dispatch talking to you like it knew your grandmother's dog's name." She blinked, then laughed once softly. "Something like that," she admitted. "Yeah," he said. "Old Mountain's got its own dispatch. Helps the ones who listen, scares the ones who don't. Do yourself a favor when you're gray and telling stories, don't pretty it up too much. It's good like it is." "You believe in it?" she asked. "Believe in the road," he said. "Voices are just how it keeps our attention. Some say night dispatch is just us, all of us, all the nights. All the watch that corner and easy on the Jake and you got this kid stacked up until they got heavy enough to talk back." He shrugged. "Either way, I don't argue when it tells me to check my mirrors." That night, alone in the cab again on another highway far from Whitecap Ridge, Shay tuned through the CB channels once, slowly. 17, 18, 19. The little green numbers clicked obediently under her fingers. Channel did not appear. The moon light stayed dark. Outside, a thinner, gentler fog lay over the lowlands, turning roadside ponds into sheets of white glass. The tires hummed. The radio played an old song. Somewhere out there, she thought, roads crisscrossed and voices echoed, and in certain places, high, lonely, fog-drenched places, the line between memory and guidance grew thin enough to drive through. She wrapped her hand a little more comfortably around the wheel, listened to the night, and drove on.